Diane, I just got an email from Mikhail saying he couldn't find a link to the meeting, for the Zoom meeting. Do you think you could send that to him real quickly? All right, folks, I'm showing 7 o'clock, and we're gonna just want to make an announcement or two before we continue. For folks who are tuning in, this is a continued meeting from the Committee of the Whole meeting we were holding this past Monday. We have taken some steps to try and handle some of the Zoom bombing. The city has changed to the Zoom webinar format, so you'll probably notice that we have a different set coming on at this time. So everyone who joins the meeting, all mics are automatically muted, so no one can just drop in and Zoom bomb us. Also, we'll be using speaker view on our stream so that only the speaker is being shown. So anyone who's trying to Zoom bomb with video will not appear to most folks. And if you use speaker view in your own home system, you should only see the folks who are actually talking, and no one who drops in with a video will actually be able to talk because they'll be muted. So no one should see anyone should that be happening. So just want to let folks know we're continuing to try to improve on some of these aspects, but these are some things that we've taken, some action we've done since the last meeting. We are going to move on to our next portion of the agenda, but before we do that, I just want to let folks know that because we're still taking minutes from this meeting, any one who wishes to comment can still send to citycouncil@urbanaillinois.us. There were a few emails we've gotten since the continuance of our last meeting and this restart of this one. All of those emails will be entered into the record for this meeting. So without further ado, we were going to continue with a CPRB report. I don't know who was going to lead that off, Diane, if Mikhail was going to do that or where we were going to start. So if you let me know, I'll be happy to take direction on who's going to give that report.
Sure. Do we need to take roll? Or
continuing? Because we're continuing, we do not need to do a roll call, but I was asked to make mention of who was in the room just for the record. And so I have Councilmember Wu, myself, Councilmember Miller, Mayor Diane Marlin, Councilmember Colebrook, Councilmember Brown, Councilmember Roberts, and Councilmember Jacobson, and Deputy Clerk Wendy are all in attendance, and along with a number of co-hosts from staff. So Dan, I'm sorry that I didn't hear what you wanted. Who was going to lead off with that?
Elizabeth Hannon will, and Vacellia Clark, our staff, who are here to present the report, and then the chair of the Civilian Police Review Board, Mikhail Lyubans, will join us.
Okay.
Oh, there he is. Good. Okay. So we were going to have him lead off. He wanted to make a short statement, and then we'll get into the report.
Okay. Mikhail, you should be able to unmute yourself if you want to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'll keep it short. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. These are painful and stressful times for our country and for Urbana, but perhaps the conditions finally exist for meaningful reform of policing practices nationally and locally. Civilian oversight boards can play an important role in identifying the changes in policing practices that would best serve our racially diverse community, as well as in overseeing the implementation of those reforms. The CPRB has not been able to meet these last few months, so I'm not prepared at this time to make any proposals or recommendations. I hope that the next few months will give us opportunity to meet, to continue to gather public input, and to make specific recommendations to this body. In the meantime, because I imagine that most of you were not on this council when the CPRB was created in 2011, and I was not involved in that process at all. But I would like to take the next few minutes to describe just mention the different models of civilian oversight, and mention a couple of resources as a way for all of us to orient ourselves to how oversight works. The information that follows comes from a document called Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, a review of the strengths and weaknesses of different models. I will send the council and the mayor a copy of this text with the link to this document. It was authored by Angelos, Rosenthal, and Buchner in 2016. As you consider the different models, I want to stress that I agree with the authors of this document who argue that each board is constructed in a unique way to meet the unique specific needs of their community. As such, it is not a matter of quote unquote best practices, but rather one of best fit. So the three primary models are an investigation-focused model in which essentially professional investigators who are not affiliated with the police department are hired by the city to either duplicate the investigative efforts of the police department or to replace those efforts. And this document describes different strengths and weaknesses, but certainly this requires, it's a very high cost process that has the benefit of reducing bias in investigations, and it does tend to increase community trust in the investigation process, but also can lead to disillusionment among the public, the authors say, if the community expectations for change are not met. This is not the nature of our current CPRB. I can't imagine that Urbana has the resources to move toward this particular model. The second model described in the document is the model of the current CPRB. It is called the review-focused model, where the CPRB focuses on reviewing the quality of completed police internal investigations and make recommendations to police executives and city staff. And there's a lot of variability in this model in terms of which complaints the CPRB reviews. So as all of you probably know by now, we are an appeals model here. So I don't know how many total complaints have been filed in regard to police conduct since the CPRB was formed in 2011, but I do know that only 4 of those were appealed and only 4 were reviewed by the CPRB. So we're seeing, I'm guessing, a very small percentage of the actual complaints. The third model, just as information about what else is happening in other parts of the country, is called the auditor or monitor focused model, in which the focus is not on reviewing specific complaints, but rather on monitoring the overall pattern of complaint investigations and documentations and findings and discipline, and kind of providing that kind of oversight. And there are also, I should mention, a variety of hybrid models. The last thing I want to say that, as I started to look at different documents governing what national and local CPR boards are able to do, part of what is relevant, it seems, is the collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police. And interestingly, Part D of the side letter that pertains to the CPRB states that the police department's investigation and final determination shall be completed prior to any CPRB consideration of a complaint filed by a member of the public. So as I understand it, this means that the union is not opposed to the CPRB responding to civilian complaints directly and independently of a police internal investigation. It only states that the police investigation must be completed prior to the CPRB beginning its review. So certainly one of the things that I hope will happen as we continue to gather public input and consider how the CPRB might function in the future. But one of the things that I hope this body will consider is whether it makes sense for the CPRB to review all complaints made about police conduct and not only serve as an appeals body. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail. I think, Bill, I see you raising your hand. Did you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I had a question for Mikhail. You said that you only review, you refer to it as appeals board, and you only review complaints that are appealed. But the way I read the ordinance, you should at least be receiving all the complaints. So you should be aware of all the complaints and have a sense of what types of complaints are being made. Probably not the name of the officer, but hopefully some number ID of the officer, so you could track if some ID was receiving more complaints than the others. Have you been receiving those complaints? Because it's pretty clear in the ordinance. It defines a complaint as a written allegation of misconduct lodged against a sworn officer. And it says all complaints shall be submitted to the CPRB within 7 working days. And it goes on to say later, how a complaint can be handled by the police and then appealed. So have you been receiving all those?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I didn't mean to imply that that those 4 reviews has been the only work that the CPRB has engaged in. My understanding is that there was a time when the CPRB members had full access to all of the complaints, and then there was a window, I don't know how long, but for a little while when we did not have that access. And then more recently, maybe the CLA can provide more accurate information. That access was restored. So we do now, again, have access to all the complaints.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Did any other council members have any questions or for Mikhail before we move on? Eric, I see your hand up.
Okay, just so I'm clear that I understand, currently you have access to all the complaints, but you may not actually do a review unless the complainant appeals the finding from the internal police review, or may you begin a review as soon as the police have finished their review?
My understanding is the first version of what you said, that we only engage in a review process if there's a formal appeal.
Now I'm going beyond asking about process and asking your opinion. Do you think that the complainants understand that they have a right to appeal?
That question is probably best asked of the complainants. I believe all of the letters that are, all of the finding letters have information about the right to an appeal with information about how to initiate that appeal. So that information is there, but there's a different question in terms of, to what degree do community members trust the appeals process? To what degree do they see barriers to engaging in an appeal? And certainly one of the things that our body has heard during meetings, during the public input parts of the meeting, is that there's not confidence that an appeal is worth their time.
So since you have had access to the complaints, have you tabulated the numbers about how many complaints, let's say within the last year, have there been?
I have not tabulated, and certainly that's worth doing. In an informal conversation, I think I heard that there were over 20 complaints filed so far this year, with I think almost all of them coming from one person. I cannot verify this. This is I would need to double check.
Okay. Thank you.
Mary Alice, did I see your hand go up?
I was looking over the ordinance, and there's a couple of other items that the CPRD has the ability to do, and I was wondering if the committee had ever undertook those items. So the first one was let's see, I have to scroll up, sorry. There is something about providing input to the mayor about changes in police policy in here. There's also something in here about community outreach and recommendations. I was wondering if the board had an opportunity to do any of those activities.
So I can only speak to those questions for the past 4 years because I wasn't on the board prior to that. There have been a few, I would say, limited efforts at public outreach in the form of showing up to different events hosted by the city of Urbana and representing the CPRB during those events. That's the public part. What was the first part of your question?
Providing recommendations to the mayor about changes.
Yes, this has not happened during my time on the board, but in the last maybe 3 or 4 meetings, so this is going back now maybe in the last year, there's been a lot of interest in engaging that part of the ordinance. And part of, I think, our stuckness is that we didn't have clarity about like what would be the process, what form should the discussion take, how do we provide input to the city council, and of course, part of it is there's been changeover in the staff that's been guiding us from Alex to Preston, and now Preston has left. So we're in a little bit of a gray area, especially with COVID, in terms of figuring out like how do we even engage that. But as a body, we certainly have interest in doing this part of the mission.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mary Alice, thank you. Dennis, Bill, or Sharice, did any of you have questions for CPRB Chair Mikhail? I'm not seeing.
If I have anything to say or any questions, can I ask later? Because for me, this is still kind of like a tutorial.
Of course, Sharice.
Learning how this works.
I just didn't know if you had anything you wanted to ask. Dennis, I see your hand raised. You should be able to unmute yourself, Dennis.
Okay, I think I did it.
There you go.
All right, so I guess I'm kind of curious to find then in the future going forward, is the CPRB going to have discussions, continue to have discussions about the breadth of their scope as far as a review board, or how to implement new features that the CPRB would like to advocate for if we were going to change the ordinance?
Yeah, thank you. We're very eager to have those conversations and eager to make our recommendations. So we're looking forward to our next scheduled meeting, which I hope the city staff will schedule soon.
Okay, thank you.
Sharice, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question. So the CPRB, do you only meet when there is a complaint or a review or an appeal of a complaint that has gone through? Is that the only time you actually meet?
No, according to well, first of all, part of the ordinance stipulates that we also review initially all unholstering of tasers by the UPD, and then more recently that's been changed to actual deployment of those tasers. So even when there are no complaints, we usually have at least a few of taser displays to look at. According to the ordinance, we have to meet quarterly, and in the 4 years that I've been on the board, we have been compliant with that.
So you only meet regarding tasers?
On some days, if there are no complaints and no other business, then the meeting consists of reviewing taser deployment, yes.
Okay, so you meet before, I'm looking at the chart. So you meet to talk about when it says 54 displays, 7 discharges, and what I'm trying to understand is that the displays are when they charge up the taser but not use it?
When they take the taser out of the holster, the camera goes on, and before there were body cams, this was essentially our best window typically into what was happening.
Okay. And this charges is when you actually use it, when
Correct.
it actually gets used.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand. So, like I said, then a display is that when you said when they take it out of the holster and then they actually have it, not necessarily using it, but charging it.
Well, it's charged, I assume, prior to unholstering it. So basically, it's in their hands. It's not in the holster. It's typically pointed to the ground so that it's not intimidating and a threat. So our video footage is sometimes very limited. We're just looking at the sidewalk, but it also had audio. So again, we were, when it was unholstered, we actually had an ability to listen in and sometimes see the things that were happening.
Okay.
Okay, just a reminder to all co-hosts, if you can mute your mics when you guys are not speaking, so that whoever is speaking is the only person who's showing up on the viewer. Just a reminder, little noises and bumps and things can get picked up on the mic and change the camera.
And Jared, I've got a comment as well.
Oh, okay, Bill. Sorry, I didn't see you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. And Mikhail, I guess this is directed to you. It sounds like the ordinance itself restricts some of the activities of the board in that you can't really take up any discussion about any particular complaint until somebody appeals it. So there's that restriction. But also, we've heard tonight that there's some things that you can do proactively. I guess I would just encourage you to explore, have those conversations, and find out what you can do, proactively with the community, the community engagement. If you want to, look over the policies and suggest some changes, do that as well. I believe we've heard a lot of public comment throughout the last month or so that the community is really eager for, your board to get a little bit more involved, a little bit more engaged in the process. So from my perspective, I encourage you to do what the ordinance allows you to do.
Okay, Mikhail, if you had any last words, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll allow Elizabeth to begin the report.
No, thank you, everyone, for your comments and questions.
Thanks, Mikhail. Elizabeth, if you're ready, go ahead whenever you want to.
So my report is really focused on reports that are supposed to be provided to the City Council related to the Civilian Police Review Board. And this request came a couple of weeks ago. So I did some research on this. I want to say the bottom line is that we failed to provide reports that were required for a number of years. There's really no excuse for that, so I'm not going to make one. I think that this is a very important part of the City Council's oversight of these activities, just as it is with financial reports. You review those to make sure that we're complying with your direction. So we will work to get that back on track as quickly as possible. I'll run through those reports quickly here. There are basically four required reports that I'm going to talk about. So the first is an annual report from the CPRB to the mayor and council. This was last provided in 2014 for calendar year 2013. I think we are pretty close to having all that data together at a staff level. However, because that report comes from the CPRB needs to review it before we provide that to the City Council. There is also a quarterly report on pending internal investigations, which is a little confusing, but in this context, we understand that to mean we're talking about open police complaints and those related investigations. We could not find any indication that that report has ever been provided, but we will develop a format and begin providing that on a regular basis. The next one is copies of CPRB taser display reports. And that report is also, that report is provided by the Human Relations Officer to the Mayor and City Council. So the way that has been interpreted is that those reports are only provided if the CPRB took exception to an incidence of taser usage. That has actually not happened to this point. And I provided a chart for you that's attached to the memo at the mayor's request. So there have been since February 2015 through March, there have been a total of 61 total taser incidents in Urbana. 7 of those were discharges. Of those, 3 have been reviewed and 4 are not reviewed because those cases are still pending resolution. There have been 54 displays. 36 have been reviewed, 18 unreviewed, either pending resolution of cases or occurred since the CPRB made a decision not to review every display. So there would have been no reports provided related to that, but in the future, if necessary, there will be. The final one is an evaluation of the review of taser displays. And this was a report that was supposed to be provided just once, 12 months after the effective date of the ordinance, which was in February 2015. When I started digging into this, there were a few people who sort of recalled that maybe an oral report had been made, but we couldn't really find anything on the record. So our deputy police chief has been working on that report along with the subcommittee of CPRB. The CPRB subcommittee will review that at their meeting in July. And then following that, both of those reports will be presented to the city council. So again, I think the intention here is to get this back on track just as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Were you giving the entirety of the report, Dan? I thought I heard there were 2 folks, or is it just her and Mikhail?
Yeah, Vacellia is also on. If you have questions, she can jump in where that's necessary.
Vacellia is available for questions. Okay. Mm-hmm. I didn't know if she had more to add or not.
And she's the Human Relations Officer.
Yeah, Human Relations Officer Vacellia Clark. Okay, council members, Bill, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah. So on the decision to not review taser displays and only taser uses, that's actually in our city code. It's part of our ordinance. So if that decision's going to be made, it needs to be made by the city council. So I'd ask you bring a ordinance or something to city council that we can vote on, discuss that. I can understand, why they might decide that, but I'd like to hear the reasoning and make the changes official. So, and then since they usually only meet quarterly, that's what they're required in the in the ordinance. And April was canceled, so officially you should probably meet in June. I could see putting it off to July if you can't get it going. But I also couldn't find bylaws. Most of our commissions have bylaws on their website, but I know for other commissions that meet monthly, we can reschedule meetings, and I'm pretty sure the chair has the ability to call special meetings, pretty similar to how we operate in the city council. So I'd suggest meeting more frequently for a while now that we have some momentum going on this. And I'll leave that up to the board how often they think they should meet, but I'd like to see them meet more frequently in order to establish some goals, basically. And if they want to have a joint meeting with city council to do a goal setting session, I think that could be useful. And those goals could include some of the other activities that the ordinance currently allows, as well as coming up with recommendation for improving the ordinance. I did see a list of taser displays on the CPRB website, but maybe those are just the ones that they reviewed. It looked like there's maybe a couple dozen. And that was last updated in January of 2018. So there's been some work, some reporting done on those. And I remember those being provided to the City Council. But I really appreciate you doing the background and going over what the reporting involves. I look forward to having regular and more detailed reports. I'd like to explore, using the data in good ways to help improve the department training. Hopefully if they're looking at a lot of, or however many complaints we get, whether they get reviewed or not, if they look at all the complaints, hopefully they'll have an idea of where we're lacking in training, and maybe come up with some formal reporting on what training's been done, so we see, how many officers are trained in CIT. That should be a regular metric. What our minority makeup is, and what other kind of goals that we might want to set. I happen to see that there was an organization, I think it was my brother, I forget which organization it was, but Obama was on a quick Zoom call today, completely all about reimagining policing. And it's a big effort, and he's putting out a challenge to every mayor to review the use of force policy and commit to reforming the use of force policy. I know I've read through ours. I don't know how long it's been in existence. I know the City Council doesn't set that. That's something under the auspices of the police chiefs everywhere, as far as I can tell. But certainly city administration can weigh in pretty heavily on it and make recommendations to the chief. Hopefully the chief can take some initiative. But reading through ours, it seems to me just honestly that it was written more to protect the city from litigation. You can interpret it in a lot of different ways, but basically by saying that an officer can improvise in various ways, it seems like you can always say, well, they were improvising, and there's not a lot of restrictions. And I'm not convinced that knee on the neck move would even not be allowed under our use of force policy, and that's disturbing. So I hope that that's something that the CPRB can look at. And just again, I wanted to thank you for your efforts in getting the information about reporting together.
Thanks, Bill. Other council members? Mary Alice, I see your hand.
Yeah, well, Bill basically said everything that I was going to say. I think that Mikhail, thank you, and several other people have reached out on the board, and really sounds like you guys are willing to dig in your heels and do the work here. I agree that having only 4 meetings a year, you might not be able to go as fast as probably the public would like. So I strongly encourage you to have some special meetings specifically devoted to different things. And as I said last time, I think that use of force is absolutely one of the top things at the list in terms of reviewing our policy, making suggestions to City Council and to the mayor in terms of how we would be able to change that. And then my other question actually is for Elizabeth about, you have this statement in the taser display reports that you made or whoever wrote this said it would only be provided if the CPRB took exception to an incident of taser usage. So I was wondering if you could expand on that, why that decision was made.
To be honest, I wish I knew, but I don't. That decision was made at some point in the past before I had any involvement with this. So I don't know how to answer that question. So I guess in fairness, I would like to try and go to, the intent of the original ordinance. I think it's better to err on the side of a lot of information than too little information. So we're coming right now from way too little information, and we really need to expand upon that in these reports. And as well, I think it would be a good idea as you develop these draft reports to share that with the City Council to see if we have any recommendations in terms of additional data that we would like to see, if at all possible.
So just trying to get us off on the right foot rather than the process takes a while, and I understand that, but I also want to be able to push this forward as quickly as we possibly can. So if we can get it close to a really good first start, I think that sending on around a draft to city council and the mayor and so forth, I think would really get us off on the right foot for the reporting element here.
Yes, certainly. And I'll say also, even once we settle on a format, just like we have with financial reports, once in a while somebody will make a suggestion and sometimes we'll just tweak it a bit. So I don't view it as, even once we settle on a format, that it's, done forever.
Okay. And then, Mikhail, I'm sorry, I did have one other comment. I think that the ordinance talks about the CPRD working on the forms, so the complaint forms and the appeals forms, and suggesting some different modifications. I think at some of the CPRD board meetings, there was some suggestions in terms of including dates on the form, such as you have a right to appeal by this date. I think that's a really good suggestion. So I also encourage your board to look over those forms to make them as easy to fill out, but also to give you enough information that you have that conversation amongst your board.
Yes, thank you. Can I respond really quickly to something Bill said about why the CPRB changed the way that it's reviewing tasers?
Go ahead, Mikhail.
And so this is partly a statement and partly a question, I think. But my understanding of the ordinance is that it mandated that the CPRB review all displays for a period of 1 year. And so that year has expired. And given that so our reasoning was that given the time investment by the assistant chief in compiling and redacting video for us, and given that in looking at, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but whatever, 30, 40 displays, we have never had any issue and any reason to be concerned. It seemed to make sense for us to move towards reviewing all deployment and not look at displays.
Bill, did you want to add comment to that?
No, thanks for clarifying that. I'll double check the ordinance, make sure.
Okay. Eric, I saw your hand next, and then Sharice, I see you got your hand up. I got you after Eric.
I do think it's reasonable not to have to report in any detail on displays, because nobody ever, to my knowledge, nobody ever got hurt by looking at a taser. But yes, it would be good to have reports of the circumstances on deployment, including those. I mean, if you review deployment, there would be some record of your deliberations. And it really would be good to share that record of your deliberations on the deployment with the council. I remember very, very, very well the process of deciding to adopt that ordinance and of adopting it. And I think that as much as can be done to demystify tasers as possible is really a good thing.
Thanks, Eric. Go ahead, Sharice.
I was just going to say that I was wondering if there, Mikhail, if there's a rubric that is used to determine what gets reviewed and what doesn't. Like if even with the just the display, is there a rubric of sorts where if what you hear on the audio seems to be kind of volatile, and that's why there was a display, not necessarily a discharge, or do you determine, how do you determine what not to review and what to review?
Well, we used to review all displays. So anytime a police officer took the taser out of the holster, we would review that. And as part of that review, we would have access not only to the video and audio associated with the taser, but also to any of the footage available through the squad car cameras. And then once the body cams came on, we had access to those as well. So we usually had many different points of view and many different angles through which we could determine what was happening.
Okay. That's it.
Okay. Dennis or Bill Colebrook, did either of you have further questions for Elizabeth or Mikhail? Dennis, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm really interested in knowing too a little bit more about plans for public input and public outreach by the CPRB. I know that my neighbor Scotty Dossett, who's also been on the CPRB since its initiation, has been a chief proponent for programs to outreach to the public to explain what their program is and how the public can interact with them efficiently, and has felt that there's just been so many internal changes and personnel shifting that it just never have really gotten off the ground to the degree that he expected it would be. And so this is something that I hope that the CPRB will also pick up as far as its responsibilities in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Any other council members before I ask Mary Alice to take the chair so I can ask a couple questions, make comment? I'm not seeing any hands up. Mary Alice, would you take the chair for me so I can make a comment and ask a question?
Absolutely. The chair recognizes Jared.
Thank you, Mary Alice. So one question that I had was about, we've heard a bit about a notary requirement for complaints. Mikhail, are you familiar with what I'm talking about? My understanding is that that requirement, I haven't seen it in the ordinance. Do you know when that came about or why that requirement exists?
Can I add something right here?
Oh, go ahead, Vacellia. Sure.
Okay. The notary is a requirement for the police complaint itself, and the police complaint that requirement existed prior to the CPRB being established, and as a result, as the ordinance was being drafted, the police procedure was just basically put into the ordinance itself.
Okay, so that requirement is not in our ordinance. It's a police policy.
No. Well, it was a part of police policy prior to the CPRB being created.
Sure. No, I understand that. And so it was, is it in the ordinance? Or it's just something?
I believe the language is in the ordinance that the complaint has to be notarized.
Actually, can I speak to that?
Go
Yes.
Go ahead, Diane.
Yes, go ahead, Diane.
I had an hour-long conversation with Scott Dossett this afternoon, which was great because he's the historian for the CPRB. But we talked about this requirement, and it apparently the notary requirement is actually on the form, the complaint form. But okay. I believe he indicated it wasn't written into the ordinance itself, but it's always been part of the complaint form. And as Vacellia indicated, that was incorporated into the process.
Okay.
And that's to confirm identity. You know, that was part of the process to confirm identity.
I saw Scott raised his hand briefly, but he put it back down. So I'm assuming he was going to confirm what you just what you're just saying.
So Jared, do you want me to still keep the chair, or would you like it back?
No, I'm going to continue with just another question or comment. But
Scott has raised his hand.
Scott did raise his hand. I just noticed it. If you wanted to recognize him.
Okay, I will unmute you, Scott, and recognize you.
Hi, thanks, Mary Alice, and everyone for all your time. Yeah, the story kind of unfolds after a big debate. Believe me, it was vigorous within the CPRB as we were coming up with our policies and procedures and, you know, kind of laying this all out. I think Todd really envisioned a system that was driven very much from the HRO and not the police department, that might give people more legal standing based on them having had a form that was notarized. And I can't critique Todd for that, but that's the way the conversation developed about that particular item. Other than that, I think it's pretty evident that there's this dynamic tension that we have between those two offices, one of which has been unmanned for a while. So I won't get started on that. I'll just leave. Thank you so much.
Jared?
Thanks for adding that, Scott. Thank you, Mary Alice. Okay, well, that's good to know that some history on that and why it's on the form, even though it's not in the ordinance. And obviously there's a little bit of, I think, what are we following, the form or the ordinance here? I didn't have a lot of specifics on the CPRB as it exists today. Just as a comment to council is, you know, with it being almost entirely unfunctional since its creation and not giving its reports, not doing its due diligence and what it was prescribed to do by ordinance. You know, even though we're going to try and resurrect this, and it may be a tool in our toolbox about how we look at what we're going to do with our police department moving forward, coming from the calls of the public. I would strongly encourage members to look beyond, members of the council, talking to you guys, look beyond simply what is possible through the CPRB as the ordinance is written today, and remind folks that, you know, if we really take into consideration what the calls are from the public and what the best and brightest folks who are looking at what people really need to do to have transformative change in police departments, that it extends beyond even our ordinance of the CPRB, that I would encourage everyone to think that we need to think beyond, you know, well, what can the CPRB do better? Because even if we are able to get it functional again and bringing reports to us, it's not going to get at some of the roots of these larger issues that we're facing with police departments across the country: lack of accountability, lack of oversight, and especially civilian oversight over police departments. So just a comment to folks, you know, and this is one of the reasons why, you know, at the last meeting, and I'll, you know, continue to say that we need to have a special meeting to discuss, you know, this issue in depth, because it, you know, CPRB is just one portion of this equation and it goes way beyond the issues that are here. And I think, but council members obviously did a great job in addressing some of the issues, and it is one part of the piece, but I think the picture is a lot bigger, and we need to not lose sight of the bigger things that are going on here that extend beyond the CPRB. And that's it for my comments, Mary Alice. If you want to,
would you like the chair back?
Sure, and I'll recognize folks to respond.
Can I interject, if I may?
Go ahead, Carol.
Thanks. I was trying to raise my hand, and for some reason I don't have that option on my screen. But you know, the subject of the notary is something that Jim Simon and I have been discussing recently, because we have gotten some appeals of that issue on CPRB or the police complaint forms. So I think that Jim could add some more a greater understanding for folks about the nexus between what the ordinance says in terms of the need for a sworn statement and the use of the notary, of the notarization.
Okay.
Thanks.
Jim, did you want to comment?
Yes, I can comment. Carol is right. We have been discussing this. The ordinance, as reflected in the form, does require a verification of the complaint, essentially that the person filing the complaint essentially attests that he or she has knowledge of the facts that they're alleging, and personal knowledge of the facts, and that they believe them to be true and correct to the best of their ability. It is, the notary is not the attestation. The notary is simply that the person, the notary, signs his or her notary public area on the form, attesting to the fact that the person who is executing the form is in fact the person, i.e. somebody's not signing somebody else's name. Not too long ago, the Notary Act was amended to in fact require notaries to check identifications to make sure that the person who represents him or herself to be the person signing the form is in fact that person. It is customary that verifications, and it's used all the time in court, verifications include a notary. A typical court verification reads something like this: under penalties as provided in law, pursuant to section 1-109 of the Illinois Code of Civil Procedure, the undersigned certifies that the factual statements set forth in our case, the complaint, to which this verification is appended are true and correct, except as to matters therein stated to be on information and belief. And as such matters, the undersigned certifies as aforesaid that he verily believes the same to be true. Then the individual signs that verification, and the notary places his or her signature, the date when the notarization occurs, and either a seal or a stamp. And it is the notary's obligation to assure that the person signing the form is in fact that person. And that's probably ultimately how whoever drafted the original form, going however far back, my suspicion is it might have been somebody in legal before Kurt, Michelle, or I appeared on the scene, who included a notary on the verification part of the form. So it is customary in court proceedings. You know, a lot of judges require it, if not by statute.
Thanks for the background. Bill Colbrick, I had seen your hand before. Bill Brown, I'll call on you right after him.
Yeah, thanks for recognizing me. I'm going to also read from the law, and the other council members may not be aware, but there is a law that is titled, the Illinois law, Uniform Peace Officers Disciplinary Act. So this I believe the history of this was based in just a series of complaints nationwide and in the state. And basically, the law was created in order to give police officers some basic fundamental rights in the investigation and disciplinary process. Understanding that police officers are citizens, they have rights. Police officers are employees, they have employment rights. And there's to the point of the notary, there's a section in the law that basically says the officer, before administrative procedures are instituted, the officer shall be, and I'm quoting now, the officer shall be informed beforehand of the names of all complainants. So that speaks to Mr. Simon's comment that it's used to affirm the person's identity, because obviously if a police officer is going to be disciplined, if he's going to have consequences to his career, possibly lose pay, possibly lose his job, it is his or her right to have a fair process. And part of that fair process is to know who is complaining against him. So I just want everybody to be aware of that law. Once again, it's titled the Uniform Peace Officers Disciplinary Act. And people like me have to abide by that whenever there is complaints and an investigation that is launched against a sworn police officer. And I haven't had the opportunity to in-depth review the police officers' collective bargaining agreement. But I just want to make note that there's a lot of collective bargaining agreements for police officers in the state of Illinois that also includes some sort of language that guides how a complaint process is done, how investigations are done, and how disciplines are done as well. So between those two bodies, those two documents, I think that we need to be cognizant of those. And I think the public needs to understand that the public just can't say, hey, we want this and let's impose this. The council, well, we can't just have these wishes and wants either. We're actually guided by the constraints and the guidance of the law and other documents like collective bargaining agreements. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Bill Brown.
Yeah, and thanks, Bill, for that. I've had that in my mind, and I know a lot of people weren't aware of that, but that amount of detail was really helpful. But I had one other request for the report. When you bring the report back, in the ordinance, it mentions the Human Relations Office shall develop written standards for orientation and continuing education for all CPRB members, and it's subject to the approval of the mayor and council. And I don't remember seeing those. It would have been before I was on the council, but if those exist and you could provide those, that would be good. They should probably, and it may be something too that you need to rework because you'll have a new member coming up. So whatever you decide, or whatever the CPRB in conjunction with other people decide, I'd like to see that brought to. Thanks.
Thanks, Brown. Dennis, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Considering the forms, we're talking a little bit about the forms. I'd just like to input in. I've heard from, I guess, the public in general that they would like to see it easier to be filing forms, or make the process of filing a form for complaint easier to understand. And so when we have a form and we're using oaths, and we're using words like "I verily attest to the facts that I'm stating are true," I would wonder, isn't it possible to phrase the form in a more normal civil language, or do we have to use the approved lingo of the jurisprudence system just for our own CPRB activities? I think it sets up a barrier for people who feel like they don't know what they're signing exactly and what the implications are in the long term for them. I think they should be taken as seriously, but I think that speaking in plain language for the CPRB format is going to be an assistance to the public in general.
Thanks, Dennis. Eric, I see your hand. Go ahead.
There's still a point of fact that I'm not sure I understand. I understand the rationale for notarizing the signature on the original complaint. I mean, the other aspect of that hasn't been mentioned is I would hate to have somebody else file a complaint and sign my name to it and not have the identity verified. But that being said, I still don't know whether the appeal must be notarized. I see far less reason for requiring a notary on the appeal, because we absolutely know where the complaint began.
Thanks, Eric. Mikhail, Elizabeth, or Jim, do you guys want to comment on notarization of appeals? Go ahead, Mikhail.
I actually don't know. Maybe Scott does. I was going to ask so one of the communications that I received in the last few minutes is that Champaign does not require a notary for a complaint. And so I'm wondering if anyone know if that's true, and if so, how do they manage the legal issues that were just described to us?
Jim, do you have any insight into that, or Elizabeth?
I have no insight as to how Champaign operates with their CPRB. I will tell you, I've not had that much exposure to our CPRB, but having, getting back to Dennis's comment about prudence in terms of forms, when we file appeals in the Seventh Circuit and in our case down here, the Fourth Circuit State Court, and in the United States Supreme Court and the Illinois Supreme Court, those briefs and statements, there's some attestation. It's more in terms of form rather than substance, because obviously it's mostly argument. So at least there's some kind of, history to it. But as Dennis indicated, that's up to you all. It's a policy decision whether to follow that, and it would be a CPRB decision in terms of language. Going back to Dennis's question, I would see no problem in using more of a layman's language for the verification rather than a more legalese at all. Okay. Again, it has to be worded still carefully to make sure it does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Scott, you might have a comment on that. I see your hand raised. I'll go ahead and recognize you.
Yeah, thank you. The ordinance does not have any kind of detail whatsoever in terms of how the appeal process is actually elicited or managed. At this point in time, we've had the original complaint, which should be housed in HRO. The police department has done an internal investigation. The chief writes a nice letter. The complainant gets back and says, I'm not happy. I don't know that we have ever used a separate form of any sort to elicit that appeal. It's kind of common knowledge. The complainant gets back to the chief, and I don't really know. The best person to answer that would probably be, chiefs who's gone through an appeal. And so Chief Serafin would have done one, just a couple of weeks ago, or months ago. So that's just little input.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Jared.
Vacellia, go ahead.
I just want to give a little history here. The notary issue didn't become an issue until COVID, because the folks would bring their complaint in and the police staff would notarize the form for them. So this whole issue of notarizing and came up as a result of the building being closed to the public.
Okay. That's interesting to know. Further council comments? I'm not seeing anybody's hand raised. I am curious with it seemed, this is obviously something that's going to need a lot of work still. And again, outside of the work specifically on the CPRB, which is important, I want folks to remember not to lose sight of the bigger picture in this. I think we're going to need probably another chance to talk about this in this format because we've raised some issues here, and I've gotten some information that's, we just need to make these things accessible. I think the consensus is there to do so, and in the process of tackling that, I think we'll get there. If there are not any further comments or questions for staff, we'll go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. Okay, I'm not seeing, did I hear somebody? I didn't, I'm trying to watch everybody's video. Okay, all right. Well, we're gonna move on in the memo, and I believe we have a CIP Capital Improvement Plan presentation next.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, Carol.
Hi. I'm really excited, and I see some smiling faces of people who are going to help me with this presentation. Also, this is what we're going to call the new and improved CIP for your review. This is the first installment of 2, and this is we're going to talk to you about the projects tonight that we will be presenting in greater detail in terms of an actual financial plan in a couple of weeks. But I do want to tell you, by way of introduction, that this has been a real team effort, and in the past, I think the CIP wasn't really given a lot of didn't provide a lot of opportunity for input from different staff members, and so this year the whole effort has been led by Will Kolchowski in my office, and we plan to keep the sort of the ownership of the CIP in the city administrator's office going forward rather than in Public Works because of the cross-cutting nature of it. We haven't been able to take full advantage of that with other departments and our external partners like the Park District and the school district like we would like to. But this is, this is going to be a work in progress, and we're going to and we will do more and more as we move forward. But the big difference is that we have developed these project books, and we're going to walk you through the projects tonight. And Will is going to be our sort of MC. I just want you to understand how the presentation is going to go. I believe that Will is going to share his screen, and then different folks that are on the team, whether it's Shannon or Justin or Vince or myself, we will then just talk through the slides as we go along. So I'm going to turn it over now to Will.
Thanks, Gail. So should be sharing now. I don't know if what you guys can see.
I'm seeing a loading.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing too. So,
on mine.
Okay.
There it is.
All right. So as Carol was saying, this is the first of 2 CIP presentations, and this one we're going to kind of focus on projects, which is the kind of what we're going to do.
William, before you get in, sorry to interrupt, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and your involvement in the project?
Yeah, so I'm a management analyst for the city of Urbana. I work for Carol. So my involvement is kind of, I guess, moving the project along. I'm not an engineer by any means, so for the, if you have technical questions about the projects, I'm not your guy, but if you have some questions about the process, and I can probably answer those. And we'll get, Justin, Shannon, and Vince are going to, they're going to present on a lot of the details on a lot of the projects a little bit later on.
Thanks, William.
Thanks. So this is the first of 2. We're going to talk about I'll talk about some of the changes and kind of the process and the presentation of the CIP compared to last year and previous years. And then we'll kind of go into a lot of detail about the projects. And, there's a lot of information out there, and, it's a long meeting. So we'll try to be as concise as possible without kind of selling you guys short. And then in a later meeting on the 15th, we'll kind of talk about kind of how this all gets implemented from a timing and funding perspective. So I know I said I wasn't going to talk about numbers, but I have just kind of one slide to begin with numbers. There's 2 quick points I want to make. The first is kind of what is the CIP? What are our capital assets that we're trying to build and maintain? Most of it's streets, but there's also a significant amount that's sewers, streetlights, sidewalks, and public facilities. And the kind of the numbers I have on the right of the screen there. So you'll see this more next year, but for fiscal year 21, we're proposing to spend $6.5 million. So the whole pie together is about 1.3 billion. So it's about a little less than 0.5%. So it would take 200 years to kind of spend all that. But infrastructure doesn't have a 200 years shelf life. So kind of when you think about, why are we kind of changing it? Part of the reason is because there's always going to be more projects than we have money to spend. More projects than money. So kind of figuring out how we choose what projects to do. Part of the reason why we made some of the changes is to try to make that a little bit more clear. So where does that money come from? There's 5 major funds that make up the capital improvement plan. So you have the capital replacement and improvement fund. You'll sometimes see the shorthand as a CR&I fund. You have your your motor fuel tax funds and your different sewer funds. The thing to note about the funds, though, is your motor fuel tax funds and your sewer funds. You have restrictions on those monies. The sewer's got to pay for their respective sewer improvements. The motor fuel taxes pay for transportation-related improvements. So the capital replacement and improvement fund is kind of the only one that has a lot of flexibility in which you can spend it on, and that's kind of important when you think about facilities funding. That's really where that comes from. And that's funded by general fund transfers from the city. So kind of, talking about, we made some changes. So what is the change? If you're going to sum it up in one slide, the change is that we changed the organization and kind of the process of the CIP to be a fund-based plan to a project-based plan. And the reason why we did this is it's really just for legibility and understandability from your average consumer. When you do it from a fund perspective, you start with those particular funds, the restrictions, you figure out what projects you want to do with that. And then you kind of have it for each fund, and then you kind of get this big report. And so somebody who's not familiar with it, who's not an engineer like myself or just a regular citizen, trying to figure out what the city's doing and why are we doing it, it's not immediately clear. There was a lot of rationale and decision making in the past, but it's not always clear in the CIP what that was. So that's what we try to do this year. And this isn't a one-off thing. This is a process. Carol kind of mentioned kind of the inclusion of other departments and outside agencies, and kind of being more robust. How that that was a casualty of COVID this year, just in terms of timing and staff time when that all hit. So this is an ongoing process. It's by no means a one and done thing. So kind of talking about the planning process, how do we create the CIP this year? Well, the first thing we did is we reviewed all of the previous projects that were in the CIP, and then based off of input from the operations staff, engineering staff, and the different master plans we have and public input in the past, we kind of came up with a new list. And this is we got a lot of input from the operations staff, and they're really crucial in this kind of phase of the project because they're out there every day fixing potholes, and they kind of get a real intimate idea of where the issues are. So from generating projects, you kind of start to prioritize them, and we took a holistic approach to this. There's not a formal scoring metric that shoots out a number and then you rank it solely on that number. The facilities plan has a lot of information, and then for the transportation projects, we looked at a lot of different things: traffic count, street classification, bus routes, the age and material, the length, the project cost. So we looked at a lot of different factors for each potential project, and try to kind of prioritize them that way. And the way we kind of did it this year is we put them into buckets, and then it ended up working because when we looked at the financial projections that our awesome finance staff, especially Don Ho, what they kick out, we had just enough money, more or less, in the next 5 years to kind of do our priority one projects. And so we put that all in a plan. And then even though only fiscal year 21 gets incorporated in the budget, you still want to make sure all your fund balances, and you want to make sure the plan is realistic where nothing changed, which that never happens, but you can implement it as we present it today. So that's kind of changing the process. There's some significant changes as well, kind of from a substantive standpoint as well. The first is, COVID-19. I don't think we need to talk too much about this, but, motor fuel taxes especially are impacted this year. And that's something we haven't quite seen. We haven't seen the revenues yet, so we don't even know quite exactly what it'll be. I mean, we have a forecast, but, it could change. There could be a second wave. There's lots of things that could change. So this will be something that we're continuing to look at. Another change that we've done from previous years, this is especially true for the, when we reviewed the maintenance line items, is in the past, and we've been working towards this the past couple of years, is the practice was kind of carry over balances. So an example of this is kind of for the pavement maintenance planning services. Every year there'd be $50,000 budgeted, but we never spend that except for every few years once you banked up, $200,000 or so, and then you would do, a planning study for pavement condition. And so, instead of doing that this year, we try to do each maintenance line item be what we think we're going to spend. And then for the planning services, I think it's fiscal year 23 or 24, we proposed $200,000 that year and zero for the rest. We have some new transportation projects that you all have never seen before. but we'll talk about that later, so I won't talk about it now. And then something we did strategically this year is we tried to focus on planning and engineering for the fiscal year 21, as opposed to physical construction. There's a couple reasons behind that. A lot of it really is COVID related. There's a lot of uncertainty, but there's also a lot of grant opportunities. There's always talk about stimulus programs. A couple weeks ago, the state of Illinois, as part of the Rebuild Illinois, they did a special fast track grant for the kind of in response to this. But a lot of those have to have shovel ready projects. So the goal this year is to make as many projects eligible for grants and shovel ready, because as you remember from the first slide, there's more projects than we have money for, in the grand scheme of things. So I mean, we want to be strategic in trying to get grants from outside agencies, from the state and from the feds. This year, the CIP incorporates facility projects. So last year we did or the past 2 years we've done the facility master plan. That's just about wrapped up. So we've started implementing the recommendations from that into the CIP. And I think we'll talk about this more on the 15th, but over the life of the CIP and beyond, there's a lot of facility needs. And, as it stands now, especially in that, the CRI is the only fund that can pay for this, to do everything that the facilities plan says we should do. Ultimately, in the future, we're going to need to put more money if that's the, path we want to take. That's something we'll kind of make more clear in the next presentation. And then the other kind of big change is, we organized it by project. So we created the project books. So what is the project books? It's basically just, where are they, what are they, and why are we doing them? You got a couple different fields, and there's a lot more than just on these sheets, but we try to make, this one pager with, standard fields to make it really legible to kind of go through and understand what every project is. So with that in mind, I'd like to go, we're moving on to our transportation projects.
Okay, I'm in charge of segues. So the segue for transportation is to say that Shannon is going to take the lead, and I'm going to interject on one project, and Justin is going to interject on another project. But tonight we're only presenting those projects that we are currently proposing for funding in the next 5 years. But in the project books that we sent you, I wanted you to see what we had considered overall in terms of the prioritization, so you know what we rejected as well as what we are proposing for funding. So with that, Shannon, take it away.
Hi, I'll give a little introduction that Jared had asked for. I'm Shannon Barandic. I'm one of the engineers with the city. My primary focus has been in transportation. I've been in transportation and for quite a long time, even with the U of I. So I will start the slides from here. So, or can I move these, Will, or is it you?
I think it's me right now.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to start off with, we hired AppTech. This was actually when Sean Weiler was still here, to do an entire pavement assessment of the whole city. They drove their van around, radared, lasered, took pictures of the entire road network for the city of Urbana. Over the past several months, they've been putting together models, pavement condition assessments. They actually just emailed me today. They're finishing up some of their programmatic models, which will help us in the future do further CIP, have a better understanding of what's going to cost, what needs to be addressed. Because while our operation guys are amazing and they do drive the streets the entire time, sometimes there's things that just get missed. So this will help us fill in the blanks, fill in the cracks. That's transportation fund, by the way. And so hopefully once they'll get it done here the next week or so, and then they will also present to City Council the models too, because that's one of the deliverables that we're waiting on. So next slide, please. This is just an overview of the transportation projects. The only ones I'm going to cover are the planned projects, with the exception of the ones Carol and Justin will talk about. Future projects are just mentioned. Those are in the project books. Those are not what we're covering tonight. So first one is Lincoln, Washer to Clarny. Lincoln is one of the highest traffic streets in all of Urbana, and this section of pavement is falling apart. There's multiple student residences, there's also safety concerns for crossing the street. There's a bus route. It really presented itself as something we do need to focus on from a safety standpoint for Urbana residents. So, next slide. Here we go. Fairlawn Divine may not seem like a street that is a high priority to a lot of people because they don't drive on it, but it is actually used by quite a lot of people. It's a bus route. It's a residential neighborhood. It's also one of the worst conditioned streets in the entire city. In the past, it was floated, could we flip-flop parking to other side to maybe stretch out the life of the pavement? And yes, that would definitely have worked 5 years ago. We are no longer at that point, and this road is just going to continue to fail, and it is also a high priority. This one, I believe, is Justin.
Yeah, so the Florida Avenue corridor here, this project will include the study of Florida Avenue from Lincoln to Vine. That includes the intersection of Race and Florida, which is on the CUATS list of intersections with safety concerns that we mentioned, or that was brought up last week. So, and we'll see that with another project here in a couple slides, I think, some more of those intersections all on that list. The first step here will be a corridor study. We've engaged the Regional Planning Commission, who's applied for a grant that we should be hearing back about soon, I think in the month of June. So they would perform a corridor study to provide some options and recommendations for the safety improvements that will be required. And then also we're going to look at some pedestrian infrastructure improvements that could be done as part of this project. So once we know what the configuration of the corridor would look like, we would move forward with design and shoot for construction in 3 to 4 years. This project will make use of federal funding through the Highway Safety Improvements Program, and then probably a combination of local and state MFT funds and possibly ITEP grant funding for the pedestrian improvements.
And I'm just going to jump in real quick again, because I think this is a good point to mention that, a lot of the cost figures you're seeing, both in the CIP and the project book, same ones here. A lot of these, especially for the new projects, are, just back of the envelope calculation. So especially for a project like this, where we're doing a study, the scope is going to change. So, year over year, these numbers are going to, they're going to fluctuate just because, we're getting more information about them.
And just to that point as well, we're going to try, as we go through and refine the project pages over time, to explain, like right now we have a lot of BOE, back of the envelope numbers, and they're designated as such, but we will tell people going forward what the status of, what level of design are we at, and that the scope as well, so that people understand what's in the scope and how refined that cost estimate really is. Okay, now, Race, Washington, and California. The reason that I'm doing this one is because this is one that Bill Brown had asked about a couple weeks ago. And I mentioned that the scope of it was, we were still having conversations about the sidewalks and the trees. And so, the sidewalks and whether that was included in the scope of the project. So this was one that we were actually trying to pursue the fast track grant, which seems to be closed at the moment, even though it was supposed to be middle of the month. But I think it's oversubscribed. But we're going to go for funding on this. But as Will had mentioned, that we're trying to work towards projects that are shovel ready. The fact of the matter is that it's not shovel ready except as it relates to the actual pavement itself, because if we do curb and gutter work or if we do sidewalk work, then the trees are going to be implicated in the project, and that's a lot to sort out, and we know that that's not going to be sorted out in a matter of a couple of weeks or even a couple of months. So this is one, and I'm not suggesting that we need to talk about it tonight, but people had talked when we were discussing MCOR about a different kind of process to work through the infrastructure changes that are going to lead to, potentially lead to the need to remove trees. But what I can tell you, and I'm not an engineer, and you don't need to be an engineer to understand this, you cannot replace the sidewalks in this stretch and save all the trees. There's just too much conflict. The sidewalks are too narrow as it is, and the trees have encroached onto the sidewalk. And so we really are, I would welcome the advice of the council about how to reconcile these competing interests. But in the meantime, we're pursuing grant funds to resurface the road only.
And to do ADA ramps too at the sidewalks.
Thank you for reminding me about that part. I left that out and I shouldn't have.
Because we can do that part without impacting the trees, fortunately.
Yes.
All right. Savannah Green is mine next. I'm going to give a little bit of history on this one just because it's something that's not on a lot of people's radar. Savannah Green, when it was built, was not necessarily built up to, even of the time, standard construction practices. There was things that were done that are questionable looking back on it. It's hard to say, was that poor observation? Was that poor reporting? Was that whoever built it trying to get things past the city? I can only speculate. All I can say is right now, all of Savannah Green is in such a bad state that some of the alleys between the houses are almost gravel roads. They're so rubbleized. So not only does having roads in that bad of a condition suck to drive on, it also impacts anything under it, like the sewers, utilities. So Savannah Green has actually popped up as a very high priority. Unfortunately, the entire subdivision itself is expensive to do, so we focus on Smith first, which is the main route through there, also a bus route. As you can tell, bus routes played very heavily into a lot of our decisions. And so we do Smith in the alleys with this project to try and get as much as we could done with this allotment of money, and then hopefully get back to the rest of the subdivision in the future.
Can I ask a question about Smith?
Sure. I can't tell who's talking, so.
This is Bill Colebrook.
Okay.
Smith, as a lot of people know, that's a residential street, and it just appears to me with parking that it's really, really narrow. It's tough for two cars to pass each other in opposite directions. And there's a lot of kids, tons and tons of kids in that neighborhood. And I just think that it's kind of an unsafe environment now. I think it should be a concern of the council. Is your plan just to simply repave Smith and not do anything about the width or the parking issue?
So there's more backstory on that as well. Back when this subdivision was originally planned, it was to be no on-street parking. All parking was going to be in the alleyways, in your driveways that are off the alleyways. However, I don't know exactly what decision was made, but the decision was made to allow on-street parking. Technically, the street is actually wide enough for two vehicles and a parking lane from design standards. However, human perception comes into play with that, and it makes it think, oh no, I'm not going to fit even in my tiny little, smart car. So that actually, as counterintuitive as it seems, helps slow down traffic. That human perception of I'm not going to fit is a great traffic calming device, and it's been used in many cities. Parking cars on the street is a cost-effective way to slow down traffic. But I do totally understand where you're coming from with, there are children. I mean, there's a park right in the middle of Savannah Green. More history. In my time with the city since 2018, I have spent more time in Savannah Green than any other part of the city. I have been out there for various traffic commission items. I have been out there for the payment assessment. Everything in Savannah Green is a concern. And I would, welcome if the city council would like to talk about it further as a separate discussion. We can go into it more. If you have another question now too, I welcome it.
Can I just want to weigh in here too, just because I think it might be worth a separate discussion at some point, because what I have learned through hanging out with these engineering people and the operations people is that we have problems, and you'll see it reflected in the future projects. We have problems in a lot of subdivisions, and as Shannon said, it's not necessarily clear how all of that happened, whether we approved specifications for roads that were substandard by today's standards, whether there was poor construction observation, whether we just didn't do the construction observation. Whatever the cause is, we have problems throughout our subdivisions, and we have to begin to address that. And Savannah Green is by far the worst.
So I'll move on to Lincoln, to Oregon, to Florida. This is another study. This is a very prime route right through university territory. I believe the traffic through there is 15,000 ADT, which is average daily traffic. That is just the cars and the vehicles. That doesn't include the pedestrians, the bicyclists, anyone using the road. So and there's been, unfortunately, in the past, fatal accidents, which have led to some safety improvements. I mean, we have that brand new flashing pedestrian sign that turns on for like 12 hours a day. There's a bunch of signage through the corridor, but it still needs something else. So it's another one we're going to study. RPC is going to help us out on this. We're going to get some public input. So hopefully this is more of a project that guides what we'll do in the future, as opposed to something you'll see a concrete example of, like, we built this right now. So next. Windsor and Race. This is another one you'll get a little bit of backstory on. So Windsor and Race was repaved about 15 years ago, and it has reached the end of its life. For a resurfacing to last 12 to 15 years, that's actually really good. Unfortunately, it has gotten to the point where the pavement is starting to unravel, and since this is a high volume road and a higher speed road compared to the rest of Urbana, it does present safety concerns. There's a bike lane there too, so heaven forbid you get a car that hits a pothole and hits a bicyclist. Not only is this one that I noticed myself, but it was also brought to my attention by operations. Vince Gustafson takes that road every day, and he's like, hey, this is getting bad. So I went and did a quick survey, and it did present itself as, we need to fix this now, especially because Champaign is fixing their side of Windsor. So really just to make everything cohesive between the two cities, it's a main corridor, it's a high priority. And then I'm not going to read through this. This is all in the project books. This is the future projects that just didn't make the cut for a high priority with the budget we had to work with.
Okay, the segue to traffic signals and streetlights is that the way that we have approached traffic signals and streetlights in the past has been really, really reactionary, and it's problematic for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the infrastructure is aging and we need a plan to deal with it. And we have a new electrical supervisor who's eager to help guide us. This is a sort of more of a preview of coming attractions. We're not really making a departure this year in what we're proposing in the CIP. We're just going to complete the Nevada Street Series, the streetlight replacement there, and that would be phase 2, because phase 1 is about to get underway. But Vince is going to explain to you what we expect to be including in future CIPs, just so that you understand how this is going to change.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Once again, Vince Gustafson, Deputy Director for Operations here at Public Works. Yeah, I'd like to thank Benny Gardner, our new electrical supervisor, who's really hit the ground running, and basically wanted to touch on 2 major areas that we'll be focusing our efforts on and putting together information for future capital improvement plans. And first is traffic signals. We need to plan for modernization of our controller cabinet equipment. We've got some obsolescence of equipment we have at our intersections now. that we need to prepare for, and we can do a phased approach based on age and serviceability of this equipment. We plan on looking at needed upgrades to our audible push button stations and also our emergency vehicle preemption detection systems. Another great opportunity that a lot of agencies, both locally and nationwide, have been implementing is fiber optic networking of our intersections. This will allow for real-time monitoring from the office of these intersections and their functioning, as well as remote diagnosis, especially during cold and inclement weather. The ability to remote in from a nice warm office and determine, if it's, what exactly the situation is, so we can quickly and more efficiently and oftentimes make the needed repairs remotely. Well, great safety improvements that we need to be exploring. Secondly, we really need to move forward with roadway, lot, and area lighting modernization. LED technology is proven, and it's actually just become the industry standard now. The return on investments are a given. So we're looking at focusing on two main areas, that's LED street light luminaire upgrades, as well as city parking lot and area lighting, including some intuitive lighting systems for lots. We'll be looking into that. We also need to look at upgrade and replacement of our steel and concrete light poles throughout the city. I can say that we've already started operationally implementing some LED conversions. The new lamps, in comparison with the incandescents, the light distribution, the outputs, and the color temperatures are almost indistinguishable from the incandescents. So there are certain areas that we've already started that, just making those transitions now, but we need to take a much larger perspective and a much larger look at getting this done sooner rather than later, because obviously there's a great potential for energy savings as well with this.
So before I throw it to Justin for the sewer discussion, Vince, I'm just going to ask you to make sure there's nothing blocking your microphone, because you were a little muffled when you were doing that presentation. And I know you're going to talk about facilities in a minute. I want to make sure you're as clear as possible.
I'll try to speak as clear as I can, but this is nothing obvious here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we didn't do a breakdown of specific projects for and do project pages for the sanitary and storm sewers. That's something that we anticipate being able to do a little bit better next year, and in particular after we have the stormwater master plan completed. But Justin's going to walk us through the main categories that we're going to be showing you funding for in a couple of weeks.
All right, thanks, Carol. Yeah, I'm Justin Swinford, civil engineer for the city of Urbana. We'll start with storm sewers and an update on the stormwater master plan. We kicked off the stormwater master plan last year with consultant for Murphy and Tilly.
Justin, you're really breaking up.
Uh-oh. Okay. Can everyone hear me still, or is it?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay. So we kicked off the stormwater master plan study last year with Crawford, Murphy, and Tilly, our consultant for the project. They have completed the assessment portion of the study and an initial public outreach effort with a technical advisory committee that included a group of both public and private stakeholders from the community. I guess to back up a little bit, the master plan as a whole is really taking an asset management approach towards our stormwater infrastructure so that we can get a good idea of what all infrastructure we have out there and what it's going to take to maintain that and continue to operate it in a way to provide a good level of service to the city and the residents. Excuse me. So we have that condition assessment, so we kind of know what's out there. The next steps are going to be to figure out what are the costs of continuing to maintain and operate that stormwater infrastructure, and then what do our community stakeholders want to see as far as the stormwater utility fee and how we use that, how that might change, and how we can also promote things like green infrastructure and best management practices to improve sustainability in the city. So the next steps will include another public outreach effort with the technical advisory committee, and then determining what those options and recommendations will be for the future use of the stormwater utility fee. That master plan has already kind of informed some of our other annual or biannual maintenance projects, including the stormwater cleaning and televising project. This is a project where in the past we've kind of gone section by section, doing more just areas throughout the city. And in the future, we're gonna, again, kind of take after that asset management approach and look at more of the critical infrastructure. So those are some of the larger diameter storm sewers and the things that have a much larger consequence of failure than some of the smaller pipes that we've looked at in the past. So that will then inform the other two projects listed there, the sewer lining project and storm sewer repairs. Right now, we're very reactive on sewer repairs for both storm and sanitary sewers. The difference with the two systems is that we have a lot of storm sewer repairs that we know we need to make, and not so much on the sanitary sewer side. So we want to be able to determine a better plan for that in the future. And like Carol said, in future years, instead of just having a reactive project for those repairs, we'll move towards actually identifying some repairs to make as part of a specific project or our sewer repair project. And then we'll move on to sanitary sewers. Similarly, we're taking a look at our sanitary sewer infrastructure. This is more of an internal study though, and through an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Champaign and the Urbana and Champaign Sanitary District, we're working towards building a sewer model that will then become the basis of studying other areas within the city and what improvements we can make to target inflow and infiltration, which would reduce wet weather surcharging, which ultimately for residents means no or fewer wet weather backups when it rains. I'm getting a noise. Can you still hear me?
Barely. You moved quite a bit there, Justin. Just give it a minute, see if your signal comes back.
Okay, is this better?
I hear you pretty clear.
Okay. We'll try this then. So I'm not sure where I left off, but the sewer modeling effort, we just sent, we had a pretty an extensive 2-year data collection effort, and we've sent that data off to the company that will, produces the software that we're using for that sewer modeling. They're actually going to build the first version of that model and send it to us, and then that will become the basis for future studies. So ultimately, this is going to inform our future sewer lining projects, and the sewer repairs will probably stay mostly reactive because we can keep up with those pretty well. But we also, I want to mention, we do have a sewer lining project that we are pretty well ready to go, but and was budgeted for in the current fiscal year. But due to the COVID pandemic, we have put that one on hold. There's a significant impact to residents. We asked them not to use their plumbing facilities for pretty much the entire day while that work's going on. So so we put that one on hold, and we'll bid that out once things become a little bit more relaxed and more people are getting back to work, or I guess fewer people are working from home. Looks like the screen share stopped. And Will, you're muted. There we go. And that was just about it. Anyway, we also, there are a couple areas where we're going to look at private to public sanitary sewer conversions. These are areas where there's currently a shared private sewer and that there are areas where several houses are on a shared sewer line, and without a city-owned sanitary sewer main within the right-of-way available for those properties. So we're not just taking over people's sanitary sewers, but there are areas where we want to look at what options there would be for providing a sanitary sewer, and how we can work with those property owners to create a public sanitary sewer that they would have access to. So with that, we'll turn it over back to Carol.
All right. Now, as we move into facilities, I want to say, because it needs to be said, that facilities has been the stepchild of the CIP for many years. And because of that, only small allocations of funding were made available. And Vince, in his role as the facilities manager, was responsible for making little bits of money go as far as possible, and basically being largely reactive in doing that. When the decision was made a couple of years ago to do a facilities master plan, the implied intention is to be more deliberate about funding facilities projects. And so, as Will suggested, the money that's available for that, of those 5 funds that he described, is the only one that facilities can be funded out of is the CR&I, the Capital Replacement and Improvement Fund, because all the other funds have money that has to go for other specific purposes. So you'll see this more in a couple of weeks about how we would propose to fund some of the projects you're going to hear about. But and one of the reasons why we're changing the way that we're presenting the CIP is so that you have a fuller understanding about the trade-off between any project that is being funded out of the CR&I fund, against every other project that's being funded. So there are some transportation projects that are actually competing with facilities projects. So you can't just prioritize among transportation projects. You have to prioritize across the entire CIP. So that's just a preview of what you'll be looking at in a couple of weeks. And now Vince is going to talk about some of the priorities that came out of the facilities master plan.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, first and foremost, I think I appreciate the opportunity to actually get to present this information. It's a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to explore these projects in further detail in the future. But I thought I'd start out with just recapping where we're at in the facilities master planning project. 2018, we released a request for proposals for the purposes of a master plan services, and that resulted in hiring the Chicago-based consulting firm Canon Design. And I'd like to start off by thanking them and their staff for a considerable effort to date to put this information together for me to share with everyone here. The goal of the project is the development of sound, actionable, and fiscally responsible facility planning that supports the entire city government organization by providing safe and inviting work environments that meet the varying operational needs of all city departments. Being such a major undertaking, we decided to break it into 3 phases. The first phase of that is the facilities condition assessment, which I presented back in June of 2019. And this was a visual observation of all the physical components of each of the facilities. And we went item by item and basically put a prioritization of need repairs and facilities deficiencies for the purposes of developing what's known as a facilities condition index. And that's an industry recognized benchmark for rating the condition of the facilities. And we found that in general, on average, our facilities were poor, and in several incidents trending towards critical and recommendations of divesting. Phase 2 is space needs and programming, which I presented back in December of 2019. And this was more looking at the space and how we organizationally use it. It's involved a series of multiple employee engagements, visiting sessions, employee surveys sent out to all staff, in a series of focus groups, as well as targeted interviews with the department head to really dig into the existing challenges. And the key outcome of that was 5 key findings. So using the facilities condition assessment and the 5 key findings from all the data collection in the space needs and programming, we were able to develop a sequence of projects, which is where we're at now, nearing completion of the facilities master plan, that we can make data-driven decisions and use key findings to rank and prioritize projects, as like Carol said, with limited funding opportunities. So I'll go ahead and start working through these projects one by one. First and foremost, whenever we look at projects with limited funds, I always like to rank them first: life, health, and safety; second, operational; and then third, amenities and aesthetics. So right out of the facilities condition assessment came a recommendation for a full ADA and life, health, safety study of all of our facilities. It wasn't necessarily in the scope of that phase, so we contracted directly with local architectural firm Bailey Edward, and with the help of Corey Richmond, our facilities supervisor, they put together a full report of all our facilities and identified $75,000 worth of projects, mainly focusing on remediation of high priority ADA and life, health, safety concerns. And some example of those include updating our fire alarm system. We've got some signage issues, door actuators, and similar projects like that we'd like to get started on as soon as possible. Moving ahead, another key safety issue, we have a desperate need to improve our facilities security. This comes straight out of phase 1 and phase 2 key findings. We're looking to replace initially all of our standalone battery operated keypad locks with card readers or fob style access controls that'll help us better delineate between public and private spaces. It'll allow us to keep record of who's entered where and when, and it also will allow for very quick on-the-fly code changes when necessary, where now we have to keep massive spreadsheets of programming codes, and each individual door has to reprogram anytime we have any sort of issue. We're looking at about $220,000 for this expense right now. Fire Station 2 on Philo Road was identified as an at-risk prioritized facility with a facilities condition index of 4. Without substantial improvements, is trending towards critical and/or divest within the next 5 to 10 years. Given that the cost to rehabilitate this facility is so high, our recommendation is to consider replacement of this, taking into account the fact that we do own the adjacent property, vacant lot directly to the south. Design and construction earmarked at $2.5 million at this time. Fire Station number 3, North Lincoln Avenue, almost very similar, identical condition, both 1960s constructions. We're looking to also replace this facility with new to meet or exceed the current capacity. We'll have to consider acquiring land in the vicinity of this existing station prior to proceeding. Almost the same price, $2.4 million currently estimated for this. I think this project stands out probably more than any in recent circumstances with COVID. This project calls for a quick interim renovation of our city building lobby area. We need to seriously reconsider how we allow public access while still creating, a welcoming place for residents to come and do business here. but currently it's wide open for whether you're coming to sign a building permit or you've got a crucial confidential issue that you need to deal with police. It's wide open. We need to consider options, both for the safety of staff and for the safety of residents and citizens visiting the building. Some options include considering a redesign for a welcome station that will serve as a first stop. Also considering how we could possibly redesign the police services area for situations obviously that are sensitive and require some confidentiality. We also need to look at how we can improve signage and wayfinding to make it easier for folks who are unfamiliar with the building to navigate. We're hoping to get this worked in early in the funding strategy. We're looking at $1.5 million for design and construction. This project is one of those I think that will help the entire organization. We have a desperate lack of storage facilities. As you can see, this is the existing public works site. We own the 704 Glover, as we call it, Urbana storage facility. It's currently shared between police, fire, public works, and there's document storage in the front. And it's inadequate for our needs. So we're looking to consider construction of a prefab warehouse style facility on the existing site for vehicle storage. You can see from this overview how many of our public works vehicles sit outside year round. I know that the fire department, we've been begging and borrowing spaces from other local agencies to keep our emergency response vehicles and trailers. We'd be able to store that on site, and then police has evidence overflow, and vehicles they need stored. We also look at improving our area for long-term document and file storage, which will allow us to free up some space within the city building. That's currently file cabinets where people could be sitting. Also, with this project, it would allow us to repurpose the existing storage facility for city fleet maintenance. We're looking at a $2 million budget for this project, and then I'll touch on what we're talking about in the fleet on the next slide. I was speaking with our fleet supervisor just this afternoon, and one of our mechanics who's been with us here for at least 20 years. And while our fleet has grown, our equipment has grown in size and complexity, the area in which we service these vehicles has remained the same throughout. It's undersized, it's inefficient, especially in the wintertime. We share this space with all of our public works operations. So we've got plow trucks coming in and out. We're trying to service multiple vehicles. And then if fire brings over a ladder truck, we're constantly shuffling equipment around, trying to accommodate the mechanics the space they need. So what we're looking at with the construction of the new storage facility, we would like to renovate the existing facility there at 704 Glover, directly next door, to relocate all of our fleet maintenance activities to that facility, targeting about $630,000 for that project. Our the arbor section, our arbor crews, our landscape crews, as well as our arbor supervisor, city arborist Kevin Sanderson, currently work out of this shop on the landscape recycling center site just north of Smith Road, and it's been identified as an at-risk prioritized facility for trending to critical. In my opinion, it's at critical. One of those places that you almost feel ashamed that our staff have to go and work in on a daily basis, and it's definitely not reflective of the kind of work environment we want for our staff. So what we're considering in the current plan will be to relocate the arbor and forestry and supervisory staff back to the 706 Glover site. And that'll help eliminate some of the physical disconnect between those employees and the rest of our operations team, which plays a big key part for us when we're doing snow removal operations or last year's tornado efforts when we're all centrally located. It just helps us out operationally. So this project will, this portion of the project will allow us to expand our space at Public Works to accommodate those employees. We're looking at about $350,000 for that project. So even with the relocation of those folks back to the Public Works site, we still need to maintain operations for the Landscape Recycling Center, the 4 or 5 employees and the related equipment out there. So that require, with fewer employees, a lesser scope of a renovation, but we'll be looking at earmarking close to $100,000 to rehabilitate that space for those employees who will remain out there on that site. So I'll touch on this. Depending upon the sequence of events, and when we talk about the funding strategy, there exists, the opportunity for us to combine these projects for efficiency's sake. But as we did the study and we worked through the projects, we do have these broken out so that we can look at the reasonings in the justifications independently and give us the flexibility to move these projects around as the funding is available. But the last major renovation to the Public Works facility was in 1993, 1994, when we added the front office space on the Glover Street side of this building. However, that left little updates to the remainder of the facility. So we're looking to provide for some updates to the furniture, fixtures, essential equipment here, and maybe some expansion of our supervisory area and our truck space in the back for a budget figure of about $740,000. Future projects and considerations, we're looking at the facilities master plan was on a 10-year timeline. So these would be projects that we look further back in that planning process, but still definitely have all the needs and the justifications from the facilities condition assessments and the space needs. First and foremost would be a major reconstruction of the city building that would include a reprogramming of the entire space. And this project would consider the possibility of a new building addition that would perhaps extend off the existing council chambers that could accommodate new public service, new staff training, and possibly even a new council chambers in that space. As part of that project, we will consider as an option the potential relocation and rebuild of a new Fire Station 1 that's currently housed at that facility there now. That location would have to be determined. That would be estimated $3.2 million. And I'd say last but definitely not least, at the conclusion of all of our findings, the master plan is recommending we pursue divestment of the Civic Center site from city ownership, and possible considerations for that could be a public-private redevelopment. But that definitely is a project in and of itself yet to be determined. So at this point, I'll open it up to any questions and see if Carol wants to put a wrap on the end of this.
Carol, do you want to end on a comment before we take questions?
We're just ready for questions, and we're hoping that this is going to help the public and the council understand the CIP a little bit better and what the projects entail, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hey, Sharice, I saw you first, and then Eric.
I don't know who to talk to about this. Okay, so you're thinking about 2 fire stations that will have to be totally replaced. what's going to happen with the old? Are they going to remain up? Are they going to be repurposed somehow? Are they going to be knocked down? Are they added?
The plan is to keep the existing fire stations in operation until said time that the new ones are constructed and operational. At that point, we would most likely consider being able to divest those properties, whether that's demolishing, repurposing, resale. The city ourselves would probably not keep those sites.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Eric.
Is it feasible to expand the city building upwards?
I think at this point, the opportunity we're exploring would be to expand to the east. If you're familiar with the grassy area just to the east of the existing council chambers, there's opportunity to expand in that direction. But we're also exploring if we were to relocate Fire Station 1, that entire area from the fire station base to the second floor could be repurposed for said expansion. But I think we would probably expand out to the east before we went up to the third floor.
Other council members? Dennis and then Bill Brown.
It really hasn't come to my attention how constrained staff's been in working in the conditions that they have been for the last 10, 15 years in the buildings that we've obviously been outgrowing. And it'll be wonderful to see a repurposing of the city building. I know that during the first early restrictions of the COVID-19 epidemic, there was a lot of concern about the restrooms on the first floor being used by both public and staff, and just really the security of separating public spaces from city office spaces in a way that was appropriate and convenient. And also, it's been very difficult for the people at Public Works to operate as well. So it's interesting to me too that the city would divest the land that the Civic Center is on. It looks like that facility I thought would be sorely missed, but I'm just thinking that there must be new ways to use that space that would be more affordable and appropriate for the community at large. So I think it's really positive to hear what the proposals are and that they seem to be well focused. So thanks very much.
Go ahead, Bill Brown.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I know I've looked at a few other city budgets, try to pick cities that are similar in size and everything, and I'm always amazed at the percentage of their budget that is allocated to capital improvement. And now I know why, because it's not their problem, it's our problem. We haven't been allocating enough. I think, I don't know what our percentage is. I looked at it at one time, but other cities often it's 30, 40, 50% of their budget goes to capital improvement. And some cities are responsible for park districts and things like that we aren't. But I think it's kind of interesting to compare sometimes. Obviously, we've been underinvesting in capital improvement for quite a while. It'd be interesting to see what kind of options you come up with for paying for some of this. Just a couple comments on specific projects. I wonder if the city building project is, if it's going to be planned for soon, it might be worth keeping the Civic Center as a temporary space to fill out, to use for, community development, some of the other offices that people need to access downtown. I think it would be pretty easy to set up temporary office space in there during construction. On the Ray Street project, I think the whole east side of the sidewalks are brick, and if they're going to stay brick, besides doing the ramps, it seems like it wouldn't be that hard to at least repair the brick in spots where it's missing and make it more usable. I know there's a good example on Oregon Street in the 400 block where the brick sidewalk actually goes around trees, sometimes on both sides of the tree. They'll have a tree island in the middle of your sidewalk, but it may not be ADA compliant, but it's probably better than not doing anything. So if the option is to only put in ramps or to do a little bit more than that, then maybe we could do a little bit more.
I'll chime in on that one. Our surveyor and I actually went out last week or so. A lot of where the right-of-way ends is actually sometimes on the sidewalk, so we don't have room to go into people's property without gaining easements like we did for MCOR. So that's a prohibitive action for any of these grants we're trying for right now, because you have to have those all signed and sealed to submit for the grants. So it could be something to pursue in the future, but for right now, it's prohibitive.
Okay. Well, and then we have a separate sidewalk, or we did have a separate sidewalk repair budget. That sounds like that may not work like that anymore. I think we were out allocating a certain amount every year, 50,000 a year, and it wouldn't get spent some years, and it'd get rolled into the next. But something like that, if I think they may have been waiting on some of those brick sidewalks until they knew what they were going to do with the street, and then do them all at once. But if we can repair those that can be repaired using some of that maintenance money, that'd be good. I didn't really hear a lot about maintenance, except I think, Shannon, you mentioned the paver program. Is that going to be the main focus of the modeling, is to do kind of preventative maintenance in a cost-effective way I know in previous capital improvement plans, it's been pointed out that by spending an extra $100,000 here and there on maintenance, you may be able to push off reconstruction for 5 or 10 years, and it's cost effective. There's some break-even point I'm sure Will would be more than happy to figure out, but is that kind of what the paver program is for?
So right now, I mean, we do have maintenance line items in our budget. That's for things like the slag seal, paint striping, various patching. But hopefully what AppTech is going to provide us will actually provide a holistic view of the city, so we can use it for maintenance issues, or we can use it to be like, we wanted a big design project that's going to cost $15 million down the road. It's somewhat robust, so we can do it for spot things like maintenance, or we can do it for big projects. So it's going to be pretty versatile, and I think it's going to benefit the city greatly. So.
Okay. And,
it'll also help inform our operations activities with limited staff and capability. That planning the AppTech paving management, we know where best to focus our daily activities for our smaller scale projects that we can tackle in-house as well.
Okay, I was having a little bit of a hard time understanding, but that's what I miss about not meeting in person, because it was easy enough to kind of catch somebody before or after the meeting. Maybe if I have other questions, I can follow up via email.
I can reiterate real quick what Vince just said, because I know what he was referencing. Our operations and maintenance crew is very thin right now, and this program will also help them know, I need to hit this street with our spray patch, or I need to fill a pothole right here. It will give them better ways to spend their time instead of like chasing down, on a snipe hunt, basically.
Okay. And were any? I didn't hear you. As far as the shovel ready projects go, do most of the grants require those to be road projects, or would some of the facility projects? I guess it would be maybe harder to make a facility project shovel ready. There might be more design going into that, but maybe some of the storage building or something like that.
Right.
Is that a possibility?
That was one that we considered, but we given that we weren't far enough along on that one, that's why we didn't pursue it. But a public facility like that would have been an eligible project for the fast track.
Okay, and there may be other opportunities like that. Was a relatively small total amount for the state, I think, but
right.
Hopefully there will be more opportunities for shovel ready projects in the future.
Our intention is to be ready.
Okay, and there may even be, if everybody has pavement projects ready, there may be some advantage to having some other kind of projects, so we aren't competing as much for contractors. And
we will have every flavor of project that we can.
Okay, I think that's all I had for now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Mary Alice?
Yeah, so Justin, when you were talking originally, it was a little hard to hear you. And I'm wondering if you can expand upon the private sewers. You're talking about the sewer system.
Yeah, so this is actually something that we're addressing this year as part of the MCOR project. There are several areas throughout the city where there are several properties that are on shared private sanitary sewer systems. So those properties all connect to a sewer main that's outside of the public right of way or an easement, and the city doesn't really have any records for, and these were all built a long time ago. So what we do with any development anymore is that a sanitary sewer would be required in the public right of way or within an easement, so that the city has access to maintain and operate it, and then we take ownership of those sewers. Where that didn't happen in the past, we have residents that have a lot of problems with the maintenance and operation of those shared sewers, because a typical homeowner doesn't really know much about maintaining a sanitary sewer outside of maybe their lateral, and it also creates a lot of problems with coordinating the cost sharing of those improvements. So it's not these aren't necessarily cases where the city's just going to go in and build a sewer, because when you buy a lot in a new subdivision, you're part of that that cost for developing that land included the sewer that was built to serve those properties. So for the existing properties within the city that aren't served by public sewer mains, we'll have to work with property owners to figure out how we provide a sanitary sewer within the right of way or an easement, or in some cases take that sewer over, and then how the finance or the funds where the funding of those projects works.
Okay, because I think I sent you a question about an individual in my ward who had a question. You had mentioned a private sewer situation. Yep. Do we have is there a map anywhere that people can see, like when I buy a house, I'm not going to ask if I have a private or public sewer, right? So is there an existing map for the city on the sewers?
We know of some of the areas where this exists. Again, these are typically areas where we just don't have any records on how they're served for sanitary sewers, because we don't own the sanitary sewers that serve those properties, or at least not until it gets further downstream into the right of way. So we know of some of those areas, and there are areas where it's 3 houses, 5 houses, or more. There's some of them have come up more recently, because again, when this affects one property owner on a block, it can then affect all of the property owners on the block. But so I guess to answer your question, we have sewer maps that show all of the city-owned sanitary sewers, and we'll share those in bits and pieces. But due to the implications with the other utilities, sanitary district and the city of Champaign, we don't share a citywide map of our sanitary sewer system. But we can always provide that information for residents if they have those questions.
So I guess I'm a little confused. So you mentioned the different partnerships with the sanitary sewer system in terms of why we can't have an entire city map of the sewer system. How does that prevent us from sharing that information?
Well, I guess showing that our sewer, or sharing our sewer network could, for an underground utility system, can leave us somewhat vulnerable, and it's been decided by those other, municipality or the other utilities that they don't want to share theirs. Our sanitary sewer system is tributary and discharges to the Urbana and Champaign Sanitary District sewers. So by following a city of Urbana sewer map, you could easily connect the dots to figure out where their infrastructure lies.
Okay. All right. So I think I have a pending request from you guys on that area in terms of, yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
We talk about it on a regular basis, don't we, Justin?
We do.
Thanks, Mary Alice. Any other council members with questions at this time? Diane, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank the team who put this presentation together. Some of you have been on the council, well, longer than I was, but this is the 11th year of seeing a capital improvement plan and book, and it's the first one that you can actually read without a magnifying glass. It's easy to understand. You can look at the projects, you can see how much it costs, what the project is, where it is, and when it's going to be done. And it's just, I think, serves as a model for a way to present this information to the public. So I want to thank all of you for putting this together, and it's just such a vast improvement over the documents that we had before. The integration of the facilities master plan, the stormwater master plan, the pavement assessment, which was done, by the way, AP Tech is one of our downtown businesses on the second floor above Crane Alley, right? So we utilized the downtown business. It really was one of our goals was to have this integrated approach to our city infrastructure that allow us to make decisions, funding decisions, timing decisions, and really an integrated approach to taking care of one of the most valuable physical assets in our community. And Savannah Green is the poster child for why you don't want to cheap out on construction of public infrastructure, because you pay for it down the line. So anything we do from here on out is quality, because we don't want to leave somebody 20 years down the line with rubbleized alleys. So thank you.
Mary Alice?
So there's been a lot of reference to this book. Carol, where would we find one of these books?
Well, I tried multiple times to send it to you all this weekend on Saturday, and the files were big, and then Will help me shrink them down. And so I will make sure, I had also sent them to the clerk's office, but perhaps they didn't get there either. We'll make sure they get posted and you get sent links.
Okay, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity here to provide this type of information at the library. Is there a way that we can provide these kind of big, the comprehensive plan, and now this, is it called the SIP or CAP Replacement Improvement Fund? We have these books that we reference, but it would be nice if the public had the same material. So I don't know if that's an opportunity to have something at the library where people can look at, here's the city documentation of these really nice reports that you guys put together.
Will is taking a note, and he's going to make something happen.
Awesome.
Okay, Eric.
Yeah, just a quick suggestion. If you want to share, well, I guess actually, since we've discussed it in detail, probably appropriate to share with the public. If you post it on the city website, you can post much larger files than you can email, and we can download much larger files than you can email.
Yeah, the problem was leaving me in charge of anything that's IT related. That was the mistake that happened on Saturday.
Okay.
Well, I own that, and I will own that all day long.
Nobody is perfect at everything, Carol.
Sharice, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I was kind of following along because I did download your files, Carol.
Thank you.
So something did come through, but I do prefer paper. So I don't know if there's any way that those could be printed out or something like that could be printed out so that to follow along that way.
We did used to print them out, and we didn't this time just because of COVID not wanting to touch everything. So that's one of the reasons, but also saving paper, save the trees. It's Urbana. Come on.
Oh, you know what? I got alcohol. I'll spray it.
Bill's trying to say something.
Go ahead.
The next set of the presentation, presentation number 2, where we talk about the numbers. For that one, in a regular packet, you'll get everything. It'll be the CIP, so you'll be able to see all what we talked today, the project books, the numbers. It'll all be in one concise packet, or however the file size allows us to do that. So
okay,
going forward, yes.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments or questions from council on the CIP presentation? All right, seeing none, we're going to move on to item number 5, staff report. Is there a staff report? Carol.
I have one quick item. Speaking of subdivisions, why not? As many of you know, there's been a chronic speeding problem along Stone Creek Boulevard since it was built. And this is due in part to the configuration of the road, including having a design with a median, the width of the drive lanes, and the overall lack of development. Last month, Urbana police deployed a speed trailer at Colorado and Stone Creek Boulevard. And the fastest speed recorded was 74 miles an hour. And almost half of the vehicles recorded exceeded the posted 30 miles per hour speed limit. More recently, we've received numerous complaints about groups of speeding motorcycles, not only along Stone Creek Boulevard, but also along Smith Road in Savannah Green and along Windsor Road west of High Cross. The speeding has probably gotten worse over the past few months as police curtailed traffic stops with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and certain scofflaws took advantage. Now that we're in phase 3 of the governor's Restore Illinois framework, police are increasing the number of traffic stops and have targeted the Stone Creek area for additional enforcement. I wanted people to know about that, and I'd like to urge any concerned citizens who witnessed this speeding to call the METCAD non-emergency number, which is 217-333-8911. Happy to answer any questions that people have, but we're now trying to, nip this and stop the behavior.
Thanks, Carol. Any other staff reports? Okay, we're gonna move on to the business for this meeting. First up, we have ordinance number 2020-03-014, an ordinance approving an amendment to a planned unit development at 1208 Bradley Avenue, and this came from plan case number 2396-PUD-20, and I believe we're gonna have Lily present this. Hold on, Lily, you need to unmute. There you go.
Thank you so much. It's also going to be the second ordinance. They're going to be presented together.
Okay, just for the record, that is ordinance number 2020-06-030, an ordinance approving an agreement with Union Development Holdings LLC and Scion Urbana Land LLC.
So I'm just sharing my screen. Thank you so much for everybody for, here we go. So this, I'm going to recap a little bit. We talked about this 2 months ago at Committee of the Whole, Plan Case 2396-PUD-20. And I'm just going to give a brief recap of what happened. So in 1996, there was a PUD in the 14.5 acres that are the western portion of this PUD wishes to be removed from that PUD. Planned unit development. This would allow a by right development within the R4 medium density multiple family residential zoning district. So a development that would abide by the zoning district's development regulations. The potential buyer is an affordable housing developer. And it's their intent to create 220 affordable housing units within a half-mile radius of 3 major employers. So that's a very good location, a lot of people who work jobs that would qualify. They intend to build this with state of Illinois tax credits, and that there are 2 ordinances that I'm going to talk about together because they're kind of related. One ordinance to amend the PUD, and then one ordinance to enter into a development agreement with the owner and the developer. And just for a visual aid, the existing PUD is what's in gray on your screen. The proposed development, as it's labeled, is the western portion. It's 14.5 acres. This would allow the by right development if you amend to the PUD to exclude that property. So the development agreement, a little bit about where we got to the development agreement, how we got there. In 1986, when all of this was happening, a Florida-based company applied for a PUD to build luxury student housing. And at the time, it seemed like a great deal. So Urbana entered into a development agreement The city had owned some right-of-way that was a part of a previous traffic enhancement program that wishing to extend Goodwin Avenue and potentially to the highway. By the 1990s, that plan had been really abandoned, and the right-of-way that the city had owned was right in the middle of the proposed development. So the city vacated the right-of-way as part of their development agreement. But of course, Lincoln Avenue is different today, has numerous residents who rely on bus access. People walking and biking in this area have to be pretty creative or take a lot of risks to travel south or north through the area. So it's not very comfortable. Council on the March meeting heard this case, and then in the April meeting asked staff to negotiate a development agreement with the developer and owner to reserve this ability to obtain the right-of-way for a possible transportation improvement project. The developer and owner have been working with the city and city staff to agree to terms for this development agreement for the past 2 months. And the agreement currently we've come to agreements and has been signed by the owner and development parties. A couple of key features about this development agreement. I'm going to also keep this very brief. It's been included. The agreement allows the city to obtain the right-of-way for the next 10 years. Maintenance and ownership will be the developers. After the developer purchases the land, it will be their responsibility. If the city chooses to do so, the city will notify the developer and owner of its intent to obtain right-of-way. The city will see a majority of this land remain unoccupied during this time. There are approved utilities and access drives that will be allowed to be constructed in the future possible right-of-way area. The future right-of-way area is 60 feet wide, and it's approximately 1.7 acres on this 14.5 acre parcel. Maximum intensity of the future right-of-way is listed in the development agreement. It's a 2-lane road with a multi-use path. That's not actually a proposed plan for the future right-of-way. It's just a maximum intensity. A lot of the development agreement is just really the 3 parties coming to terms about assurances that everybody will respect each other's rights and property. And that the staff will study the area for potential transportation improvements and funding solutions within the 10 years of this agreement. As you can see here, this is the site plan for the area. At the bottom of the screen is land that's hashed in red. That's the future right-of-way area that will be on reserve for the city if the city studies that and deems that they want to obtain that land. For tonight, if this is recommended for City Council for next week, there's the following options for plan case number 2396-PUD-20. It would be approve the plan unit development amendment, approve the plan unit development amendment with conditions, or deny the plan unit development amendment. Additionally, there's a draft development agreement that has been prepared and agreed upon by the owner and developer. And then the City Council would have the following options to approve the development agreement with conditions, or deny the development agreement. And based on the discussions that Committee of the Whole had on March 16th and April 6th, staff is recommending an additional condition to the ordinance amending the Melrose Apartments of Urbana planned unit development, that the owner and developer record a signed development agreement with the city prior to the closing of the subject property at 1208 Bradley Avenue. Plan Commission heard this case at the regularly scheduled meeting on March 6th, and they recommended approval. Plan case 2396-PUD-20, and staff concurs with the recommended additional condition.
Thank you, Lily. Questions from council for Lily on either the development agreement or on the plan case approval? Not seeing Any raised hands? Bill, I saw you there. Go ahead.
Not really a question. I just wanted to thank staff for all the hard work. I know it was a lot of work to put in on this, and it looks like a good agreement. I think 10 years sounds short, and it is kind of short, but it's probably a good compromise. I'm sure they didn't want to go any longer than they had to, and it might add a sense of urgency to actually study it and see what it can be used for. Personally, I think it's more likely to hopefully become some kind of multi-use path, but having the full option to keep the whole right of way and turn it into a road if some kind of MTD development project to solve the problem on Lincoln would work. Having that option, I think, is good. And then there's also still quite a bit of land to the north there that hasn't been developed. So depending on if we get any developers that are interested in doing something there, they may want to have a street there too. And depending on what happens with the water company. So there's still a lot of stuff up in the air, and it's nice to have that option. So I really, really appreciate all the work you did on that. Thanks.
Other council members? Mary Alice, go ahead.
I just would like to make a motion, if that's okay. Other people don't have any questions.
Mary Alice, before you do that, would you check the chair real quick? I just had one quick question for Lily.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take the chair.
Lily, just one quick question. I did read through it, and there's obviously a lot of stuff in that agreement, but and I agree with Bill's sentiment. Maybe 10 years is enough, and that's our compromise, and that's where we're at. We need to. But I was just curious, we didn't have anything in there that gave us the option to renew or extend past the 10 years. It's just 10 and done.
Yes, it is 10 and done. And I think part of that was what Bill had mentioned, the city also recognizing that we should have some urgency to study this issue. It does mean, though, that if 10 years comes up and say it snuck up on us or something, worst case scenario, we could still obtain that right of way and continue forward. We just would hate to, on the outset, make a parcel of land and then have a problem with a parcel of land in the future.
Okay, thanks. That was my only question, Mary Alice.
All right, you can have the chair back if you'll recognize me.
Thank you. I will. Would you like to make a motion?
I would. I'd like to move ordinance number 2020-03-014, an ordinance approving an amendment to a planned unit development at 1208 Bradley Avenue, plain case number 2396 PUD 20, with a recommendation for approval to City Council.
Is there a second? I heard Bill Brown first, so it's a motion from Mary Alice and a second from Bill Brown. Is there any discussion amongst council? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Hearing none, that motion passes, and that ordinance will go forward to council with recommendation for approval. I would entertain a motion for the next ordinance. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yes, I'd like to recommend that ordinance number 2020-06-030, an ordinance approving an agreement with Union Development Holding LLC and Skian Urbana Land LLC, be sent to the City Council with a recommendation approval, including the agreement for an option for right of purchase of an ROW in the future 10 years.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Eric. Motion from Dennis Roberts. Is there any further discussion amongst council? All right, seeing none. Oh, Sharice, you got your hand raised.
What am I seeing on my screen in consolidated plan and housing?
That looks like the next thing. Lori's sharing her screen a little early, I think.
Okay, just trying to. Like, did I miss something? Okay. Second.
we have a second. We're just wondering if there was any any discussion. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Seeing none, that motion passes, and that ordinance will also be forwarded to the full council with recommendation for approval. All right, next we have ordinance number 2020-06-031, and ordinance approving the City of Urbana and Urbana Home Consortium consolidated plan for fiscal years 2020 to 2024, an annual action plan for fiscal year 2020 to 2021. This will be presented along with resolution number 2020-06-024, a resolution approving the Housing Rehabilitation Program operational guidelines, program years 2020 to 2024. And I believe Lori is going to present this.
Sheila will. I'll need to advance the slides, but I just want to be sure. I am trying to click resume share because it says my screen sharing is paused. So I am concerned that only the hosts or co-hosts can see this right now, but not the rest of the audience.
We're seeing slides.
Yeah, but the public might not be seeing it, I think is the concern. Jason, if you're listening, do you know if we're sharing this with everyone, or is this just shared to co-hosts?
I think it's everyone. Give me just a moment here to double check on this. It is everyone. Everyone can see this.
Okay, I'll leave it over to Sheila then.
All right, go ahead, Sheila.
Unmute.
There
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Good evening. Thanks. The 5-year consolidated plan is required by the Department of Housing and Urban Development that guides the program and planning implementation of our federal funds. We are the lead agency for the Urbana Home Consortium, so that, along with the City of Champaign's plan, is included as a part of this. Each year, when we look at our annual action plans, we will go back to this plan and use it to guide our priorities and our plans. We started this planning process back in July, and Lori, for some reason, the slides are not advancing.
What you might try, what you might try, Lori, is stop sharing and then start sharing again.
Hey, all right.
Looks good.
We'll need to go back a couple. Or one at least.
All right. I've tried, so
That's okay. That's
definitely
okay.
a lag. So
That's okay. Just leave it there. Data used in the analysis for the plan and to determine needs comes from the census and what they call the CHAS data, the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy. The purpose of that data is to determine the number of households in need of housing assistance. As you know, with these federal funds, we are supposed to help our low to moderate income citizens. So the public input process started in July of 2019 with an online survey. And information on that survey was shared at a variety of places, from the farmers market, social media. We took it to any meetings that we were having with social service providers, homeless service providers. And through that process, we got 132 survey responses. Then from October through March, we attended public meetings and discussions to gather further data. And during that time period, we attended over 25 different public input meetings. This year, we did our public input a little bit different. In the past, we scheduled a week of meetings for the first week in January, and we would hold them in our city target area neighborhoods, but we didn't have a lot of participation. And so this year, we made the decision to, if there was an existing meeting, then we took our information to that meeting. So for example, if the United Way was having a meeting with the executive directors, we attended it to do the presentation. If there was a community meeting, which there were a couple at King Park, we took the information there rather than expecting people to come to us. And we feel like that was really helpful. We got reached a lot broader audience, and we got a lot more relevant input. So in February, we drafted the plan and presented it to the Community Development Commission. And the 1st of March, we released that draft plan out for public review. We took it to City Council in March to receive direction from you and outline the process. The plan has to be open for 30 days for public comment, but due to COVID, we extended that a little bit longer to allow people up through April 10th to provide input. And now we're presenting to you the final plan. From the time that you reviewed it, and we talked about it in March, there have been very few changes, more along the lines of typos, or, you know, if we were missing a piece of data from the Housing Authority in particular is when I remember we added that data in. But overall, what you got in March is what you have now. So some of the key things that were noted as high priorities is infrastructure improvements to include street lighting, street and sidewalk repairs, acquisition of land, housing rehabilitation, such as weatherization repairs and accessibility improvements, public service programs, economic development opportunities, provide affordable housing opportunities for low and moderate income persons, and reducing exposure to lead-based paint. So Lori, can you hopefully go back to the CDBG budget, because that has changed and I kind of want to walk through it. There you go. So with the advancement of the COVID money, we added that into our 2021 plan. As you remember, last week you approved the $294,000, but since our year ends in a couple of weeks, we know we're not going to be able to spend all of that. And so you can see I did a carryover of the COVID funds of $285,000. We have had a few expenditures that will come out, but the majority of them probably won't happen before July 1. We also have a carryover with it being this close to the end of the fiscal year. I can see we have about $300,000 of prior year funds that we have not spent. And so I added that in here. By doing it this way, it keeps me from having to come back like I did in the beginning of the calendar year and adjust all those prior year plans. So our total budget is $1,086,000. Personnel and associated costs with CDBG, we can use 10%, and that includes 10% of the, or no, I'm sorry, 20%, and that includes the COVID funds as well. Public services caps are usually limited to 15%, but with COVID-19, HUD has allowed us to request a waiver on that 15% for 1920 and 2021. And we have requested, and that's been approved. So we have a lot larger pot of money going into the public services line items this year. The neighborhood revitalization programs includes things like capital improvement projects, blight reduction, code enforcement, any public facilities, and that could be one I'm thinking of in particular, if Urbana neighborhood connections needs work done, those type of things, and then economic development. So our total CDBG recommended budget is $1,086,415. Next slide, please. Our home budget did not change. It's $822,390. Since Urbana is the lead agency on that, we do get 10% to be used for administrative cost. What did change on this budget from what you saw previously was the consortium split. Each year HUD looks at our area and tells us how much percentage each of the consortium members gets. And Champaign grew in size this year, and so their percentage is larger. So they'll get $308,000 and we'll get $169,000. Next slide, please. So again, the priority needs are those housing related projects, emergency housing repairs, accessibility, roof repairs, those type of things. Public service programs include programs for youth, financial education for low-income families, services to address homelessness. And this year, one of the programs could be the COVID-19 program that I mentioned later, and that'll be the subsidy payments would fall under this category. Economic development opportunities was a need that we had brought to us last year. There's a couple of businesses in the targeted neighborhoods that are looking to expand or grow, and that's not something that the city had really focused on in the past, and so we had set aside funds to help those smaller businesses in our targeted neighborhoods. And then finally, provide affordable housing assistance. This is typically with our home funds, which can provide a variety of assistance from rental assistance, tenant-based rental programs, down payment assistance, or assistance building large developments like Crystal View or the Kerr Avenue Highland Green projects. And then finally, reducing the exposure to lead-based paint. The funds can support education, testing, and rehabilitation, and then continue to support the continuum of service providers to the homeless. In this 5-year plan, we've incorporated the citizen participation plan, which was amended at last week's meeting to include the virtual meetings in case of a disaster declared meeting, and we carried that forward into the 2024 plan. The Housing Rehabilitation Program Manual, which just is the outline of all of our programs that we currently offer, what the guidelines are, how to apply, that type of thing. There's also a code enforcement plan. We've decided over the past year to have a greater impact on our neighborhoods, to really focus our code enforcement efforts by target area. And so we can measure impact and see how many inspections we've done, even if it's, tall weeds and grass, and how many were abated by the city or how many were abated by the citizens. And that's all incorporated in that code enforcement plan. And successes on all of these will be reported in September when we do our consolidated annual performance report. And then finally, the home program manual, which guides how we can spend the home funds. So the CD Commission voiced support of the approval of the consolidated plan and the housing rehab program manual. They have had both plans to look at since the end of February. And at this time, staff is recommending approval for the ordinance approving the consolidated plan and the resolution approving the housing rehab program guidelines. So are there any questions?
Are there any questions? Go ahead, Sharice.
I know the money, the COVID money, was there any discussion at all about whether that would go toward mental health issues and so on and so forth? Or did you tell us that that was, I know that the money can't be duplicated to, you can't use it to duplicate another service.
Right. The COVID programs we're going to talk about next, because the direction that I received from council when I took the base guidelines to you there were some key areas that you wanted me to go back and do some research on. And so I've done that and have the program manual and discussion that we can have after this one.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mary Alice.
So Sheila, for people who are interested to see what kind of programs might be available, I'm thinking about the accessibility one, for example. How would they apply? How would they be able to get in contact to figure out if they qualify for it?
The information is available on the website, and then we also market the programs through for example, PACE is aware of the programs. The hospital staff that helps people as they exit the hospital, they're aware of our programs. So we reach out to those avenues who have direct contact with people who would need it.
So how often are they leveraged?
You know, it depends, I think, on the year, and I can give you some history on that. This year, we've just had 2 requests that I'm aware of, and I have one that's pending right now, but due to COVID, we're not going to be able to go out there just yet. Hopefully in July, we'll be able to get out there. They need a ramp, but.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Other questions from council? All right, I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised. We considered the first ordinance and the following resolution. I would take a motion for that first ordinance if one would so like to. Charisse?
I'd like to move that ordinance number 2020-06. I'm sorry, is that the wrong one?
031.
031. Yeah, there we go. An ordinance approving the City of Urbana and City Home Consortium, Champaign, Urbana, Champaign County, consolidated plan for fiscal years 2020 through 2024, and annual action plan for fiscal year 2020 through 2021 be moved to council for approval.
Second.
All right, I got a motion from Charisse, second from Eric. Is there further discussion amongst council? Seeing none, all those in favor, please voice aye.
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 All right, any opposed, same sign. Hearing none, that motion passes, and that ordinance will be sent to the full council with a recommendation for approval. I would entertain a motion for the next resolution.
I'll make that.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Okay, resolution number 2020-060-024R, a resolution approving the Housing Rehabilitation Program operational guidelines program for the years 2020 to 2024. I recommend that these be sent to the City Council with approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, a motion from Dennis and a second from Mary Alice. Is there any further discussion for the committee? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Hearing none, that resolution will be sent to the full council with recommendation for approval. Last up, we have resolution number 2020-06-025R, a resolution approving the COVID-19 program manual that goes along with the annual action or the consolidated plan fiscal year 2020 to 2024.
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready, Sheila, go ahead.
Can you do the next slide, Lori? So the recommendations are programs were developed to meet the community needs, help those that are not already served by other programs, but respond to the pandemic. So if you remember from our conversation over the last couple of weeks, it was prepare, prevent, and respond to COVID-19 pandemic issues. We have taken the program manual to the Community Development Commission for their consideration on last Wednesday, and they are moving it forward after consideration. So we've created a program manual similar to the Housing Rehab Program Manual to go over with you. April 2nd, we received the funding notification, and then between April 2nd and the Friday before Memorial Day, we were in constant conversations with various community agencies, banks, small business, SBA, City of Champaign, Village of Rantoul, City of Danville, just a wide variety of social service agencies to kind of identify those unmet needs. So on April 28th, we took the grant process to get the administrative side of things completed to CD Commission. Council reviewed it at their May 18th study session with some recommendations. And then you approved the amendment and the citizen participation plan amendment last week so that we can move forward with the programs. Next slide. So as I said, the guidelines from HUD are to prevent, prepare, and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that can cause some challenges because while we know there's a lot of need in the community, these programs are going to have to be designed to really show that it met those three key things. The community is to work in partnership with the public health and other agencies. And we have been in numerous conversations trying to identify those unmet needs and see what we can do to provide a program that doesn't duplicate benefits of others. And then we're encouraged by HUD to move forward and not wait for their final guidance. And to date, we still don't have their final guidance. HUD did provide some waivers to allow for flexibility, which we have applied for and received. And I just applied for everything that we could get because even if we don't use it, we've got the capability if we end up needing it. So this is some of the agencies that we did community outreach to. This is, not inclusive or all inclusive. We really have been meeting and trying to do outreach as best as we could to try to address these needs. As we know, this has really had a huge impact on our community. So at our May 18th council direction was given to staff to look at programs that address small business economic development assistance, affordable housing, overcrowding issues, barriers to housing, and then think of creative ways to market our programs. So in identifying the unmet needs, there's two that came up for us: the housing security, to include rent, mortgage, and utility assistance. There isn't really something out there right now that will do that. The United Way of Champaign County, Cunningham and Champaign Township, and Community Foundation has a pot of money that will offer rent assistance for 1 month. And I think it's a maximum of $600. And to date, they have spent over $14,000 in that fund. So we know there's a great need. And then the small business assistance, such as working capital, rehabilitation, or retooling, are some of the identified needs that meet the HUD requirements. So the housing assistance that staff is recommending is a housing subsidy. And this would be up to 3 months of payment for rent, utilities, and or mortgage to help people who were current on their housing needs in March and maybe lost their job or their hours were greatly reduced and now they need assistance to get current. And that would be up to 3 months is the maximum that we're allowed to do that. And then those that maybe need assistance beyond that, working with this COVID-19 TVRA program, which is a tenant-based rental assistance program that would offer housing assistance up through December 31st. And as you can see in the manual, I wrote that deadline, but also said, or as long as HUD will allow, because if they come back and change the guidelines and will allow us to go, like say through March 31st of 2021, then we're covered with our manual and don't have to do any amendments. So the subsidy payments is a public service activity. So that's where that, raising the cap became important. And it's a one-time or short-term payment to bring people current. This is pretty important because I think there is going to be a lot of people that are on the brink of homelessness, and having this assistance will really help them. And I think it's also will help also our landlords or property managers that have people who are behind on their mortgage, and this will help, or their rent, and this will help bring them current. The program will be marketed through our local community reinvestment bank, social service providers, social media, nonprofits, Cunningham Township, rental registry, those type of places, in order to get the word out as quickly as we can and hopefully help people get current quickly. Sorry, that's my dog. And then payments will be made directly to the leasing agency, landlords, and or utility companies and mortgage company on behalf of the tenant or property owner. The tenant-based rental assistance program, HUD has allowed a lot of waivers in this regard, which is going to be very helpful to help people stay in housing up through December 31st. We would partner with the Champaign County Regional Plan Commission to administer the program. They have received funding to help fund a staff person, and they currently administer and have for several years a TBRA program for their portion of the consortium funds. And so, you know, it would be able to be administered fairly easily, and, you know, they're familiar with all the guidelines, so it'd be able to go forward. And then this will also help those who need the assistance beyond the 3 months to help them through the December 31st date or later if HUD allows. So this will give you an idea of the income limits. So when we say the low to moderate income households, a single person household can't make over $46,850 or $850. So it's a pretty generous limit. TBRA is limited at that 60% mark, and it's looking at what they make today and projecting it forward for the next 12 months. And HUD has also issued guidance, so those that are on unemployment but are getting the extra weekly payment, that is not to be included into this, because that would, of course, knock anybody out of being able to qualify for the programs. So it would be just looking at what they're making minus that PUA payment and projecting it forward 12 months. And the final program that we looked at was a small business assistance program. Many small businesses, including minority and women-owned businesses, just were not able to access the federal programs. Many of them don't have a banking relationship, and so they had to like hit the ground running once that PPP money came out, because once it came out, it was gone within 3 to 4 days. The current programs would address salary and small operating costs, but this program would allow more flexibility. It would give them an average of 2 months operating costs, not to exceed $10,000. Retooling to address certain social distancing requirements. So maybe they have to put in outside tables or that type of thing, or maybe they're going to retool their business and maybe now they're going to be a caterer rather than a sit-down diner. So that type of technical assistance and retooling would qualify under this program. Rehabilitation to allow for flexibility in meeting the guidelines, so they could receive assistance to maybe improve their ventilation systems, or, you know, rearrange their tables or rehab their dining area to make it to where they could meet these new requirements. And then it also would cover personal protective equipment for their staff. So the two programs that CDBG currently allows are an economic assistance, which is the financial assistance to private or for-profit businesses to expand, rehabilitate, or purchase equipment. And under this program, when you read the guidelines, this would allow a business, and I defined a small business, which is a business that has 15 or fewer full-time equivalent employees. Other communities have defined it differently. HUD defines a small business as 500 or less. And we really kind of wanted to focus on helping the lowest of the low since we have such limited funds. And a micro enterprise assistance is a financial assistance to a low-income owner that has 5 or fewer employees. And this designation is a little bit different. It doesn't take into account the 15, but it does take into the account the business owner being low income. And then if we get a lot of applications, we will prioritize on the small businesses who are minority and or women-owned businesses, and then those retaining the greatest number of employees. So the CDBG-CV funds must benefit individuals with low and moderate income guidelines. The micro enterprise and economic development programs are outlined here. The economic development program, it has to retain a position for up to 1 year, and the position can't require any technical training. It should be that a high school graduate could do the job. So the job does not require special skills or particular level of education, and the business has agreed to hire a low to moderate income person. So this definitions in here is all from the HUD guidelines. So these programs were developed to meet unmet needs that we saw in the community and respond directly to the pandemic. Again, the Community Development Commission considered the program at its meeting last week and recommended approval. And so staff is recommending input and approval for the resolution.
All right, thanks, Sheila. Are there questions from committee? Mary Alice, go ahead.
So Sheila, I know some of our programs are geographically bound. Are any of the COVID funds bound to certain regions within the city, or are they open to anybody?
They're open to anybody. The focus on them is the income. So they all have to be low or moderate income, but they can live anywhere in the city of Urbana.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Mary Alice, would you take the chair one more time? I got a couple of questions for Sheila.
Yeah, absolutely. Chair recognizes Jared.
Thanks. Sheila, this is, I know we spoke about this and I gave some recommendations at length, and this is really great to see. I know that there are definitely folks who are still probably on their last legs, hoping to gain access to some of these things. So it's great that it's coming available. Have you, when you are going to reach out and try to distribute this information to small businesses, in what form is that going to get sent?
I will work closely with Andrea and the economic development team at the city, as well as the Chamber of Commerce, to reach out to their mailing list, because they can reduce the numbers down to, we could focus on minority. They would have that list, minority and women-owned businesses, or those smaller businesses. The Chamber already has that divided out. So we would probably launch it that way. And there are several businesses who are aware that this potentially may be coming, because I reached out to some doing the research to try to determine, what's a reasonable grant limit and what their needs were. Were they covered in operating costs? Do they need funds for other things? So there are several in the community who know this may be coming.
Okay. I guess I was thinking more of like a program guide or something along those lines to help explain qualifications and things of that nature. Is there going to be something like that that'll be sent out to folks?
Yeah, sure. And we will probably do a video similar to what we do for the Consolidated Social Service Funding. That is kind of a application workshop, but it will be online and virtual, where people can walk through the process. I don't have the applications all finalized yet. I'm working through them, but I'm trying to keep it simple, but yet meet the HUD requirements.
Okay. Just as a request, please, when you have any materials or you have anything you're going to send out on a blast, send to me as well, because I've got a lot of folks I know who are waiting to be able to get an application in. So I'd be happy to forward any of that information on to people I know as well.
Sure.
Thanks. And thanks for your great work on both of these programs. I also have a lot of friends who are struggling to figure out how they're going to pay their rent still, and it's great that we're going to have a program that a lot of folks will be able to gain access to when there aren't a lot of other resources right now. Any other? Mary Alice, may I have the chair back?
Chair back, yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of the resolution. I will move that we send to council with a recommendation for approval, the resolution endorsing the COVID manual.
That would be resolution number 2020-06-025R for the record. Is there a second?
Second.
It's a motion from Eric and a second by Sharice. Is there any other comments or questions? Discussion on council committee. Right, not seeing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Seeing none, that motion passes, and that will head forward to the full council with a recommendation for approval. All right, I don't have any other business. Diane, is there anything you want to say before we close? You need to unmute, Diane.
Did forget to say that we our restaurants and bars open for outdoor seating this past weekend, and it was all hands on deck effort to get that done. And we announced today that live music will also be now permitted at those venues as well. So I know there have been some musicians very anxious to go back to work, and this will be the beginning of that. So thank you to all who made that happen.
All right. Well, seeing no further business before the committee, I will adjourn us, and we'll see y'all on Monday.
Right.